Chapter 617. Jing City. Mo Jingshan had just left a meeting when he received a call from Shinmu. COMO, after returning to High City, Miss Ji didn't rush to the Civil Affairs Bureau to check her marriage records. For some reason she suddenly went to G City. Mo Jingshan paused in his steps and glanced at the business partners who were greeting him. He calmly asked, G City? That's right. I've never heard of MN Group having any business dealings with G City. Besides, she went there alone. We don't have anyone there, and the transportation isn't convenient. Right now, I don't know the situation. The only thing I know is that Miss G bought a lot of gifts before boarding the plane. It seems like she has some friends or relatives there. Mo Jingshan paused for several seconds before continuing forward. After a moment of silence, he calmly said, her mother's household registration was in G City. So, is Miss G investigating her own background? But isn't it inappropriate for her to go back alone? Besides, the G family doesn't seem to have much contact with her mother's family. Some so-called relatives who haven't been in contact with each other for years, once they become suspicious, it's different from the bloodless killings in the business circle. A remote and desolate place produces unruly people. With her current temper, it's indeed inappropriate for her to be alone. Then should we send someone over? Mo Jingshan glanced out the window of the conference hall and toward the south of G City. He softly and indifferently said, wait for me to return. This bed was not just a little hard. Jinwan originally wanted to rest in her room for the afternoon, but she was too tired from running around. Furthermore, when she recalled that this was where her mother had grown up, she slightly let down her guard and unknowingly fell asleep. It was only when she heard the sounds of tables being moved and the smell of cooking wafting in that she recalled where she was in her dreams. It was most likely dinner time. Jinwan turned over and planned to sleep for a few more minutes. All of a sudden she felt a small force tugging something out of her hands. Jinwan subconsciously tightened her grip, but the other party seemed to be stubbornly trying to tug it out. Jinwan impatiently opened her eyes and was caught off guard to see Song Sisi standing by her bedside. She was currently holding onto this year's latest model phone. Unexpectedly, Jinwan, who had been sleeping, suddenly woke up. Song Sisi was a little embarrassed. She quickly withdrew her hand and rubbed it on her skirt as if nothing had happened. Jinwan looked down and saw that there were many ugly fingerprints on her phone screen. Before she fell asleep, she was looking at her phone. She fell asleep unknowingly and forgot to put her phone away. Fortunately, she had been holding it in her hand. If she had left it at the side, it would have been taken away by the two sisters. The price did not matter. None of the clothes that the two sisters had taken from her suitcase were cheap. Any of the pajamas cost more than 4 digits. However, there was a lot of information on the phone and computer, as well as the contact list of work contacts. This was the bottom line. Cousin, you're awake? Song Sisi purposely asked. Her gaze sneaked several glances at Jinwan's phone. That was the latest model of this year's phone. It seemed to have just been released and was rumored to cost nearly 10,000 yuan. And Jinwan calmly stood up, her expression indifferent. Mom and Grandma asked me to wake you up for dinner. All right. Jinwan glanced at the door. It seemed like she had to think of a way to lock the door if she stayed here for the next 2 days. Otherwise, she would not be able to sleep well. Cousin, do you usually sleep in the afternoon? Is it like being a rich young lady in a rich family, where you don't have to do any work and only have to eat, sleep, and buy things every day? I heard that Haicheng's Ji family is one of the 4 largest families in Haicheng. They have so much money that they can't even finish spending it. A young lady from such a wealthy family would have at least hundreds of thousands of yuan in pocket money every month or even more. Cousin, that phone of yours is really nice. It's the latest model, isn't it? You shouldn't have only bought one, right? Did you buy a few more to bring back? Jinwan adjusted her clothes while listening to Song Sisi's barrage of questions. Jinwan had just woken up and did not have the patience to talk to this little girl, who was clearly in her 20s but pretended to be innocent. However, since these were her mother's last relatives in this world, she patiently and expressionlessly gave a few perfunctory replies and gave a short answer. Outside, her aunt urged her to eat. Jinwan stood up and ignored her. Cousin, you really didn't buy a few more phones? That phone of yours is already worth 3 to 4 months of someone else's salary. I've only seen it in advertisements. Song Sisi dilly-dallied and was unwilling to leave. It was as though she did not want to stop until Jinwan agreed to give her the phone. After all, if she were to leave, Song Kiki would most likely fight with her for it. Thus, she wanted to make things clear in this room. Seeing that Jinwan was completely ignoring her, Song Sisi chased after her to ask, Cousin, did you buy everything yourself? Do you have a boyfriend? Could the phone have been given to you by your boyfriend? Jinwan acted as though she did not hear anything. She had already pushed open the door and left. Song Sisi immediately pursed her lips unhappily and quickly followed after her. Jinwan could not be bothered to reply. She continued probing. This Song Sisi would definitely think of ways to get information out of her and even more so, take the phone for herself. These so-called family members of her mother's family had truly not contacted each other for many years. In their minds, Jinwan was merely the young lady of the Ji family and was still relying on the Ji family to live. Thus, the words that came out of their mouths were all sour, talking about how she was a young lady from a wealthy family. They did not understand anything else about Jinwan's family. At the dining table, her grandmother's hands trembled the entire time as she ate. However, she was stubborn and refused to let anyone feed her. As a result, her clothes were covered in soup stains. This family was probably used to it and did not say anything. Her aunt placed the last dish on the table. Song Kiki was already seated at the table, waiting for the meal to start. She had already changed into a French brand dress that she had previously taken from Jinwan. Her expression was filled with delight. Song Sisi also followed over. After the family sat down, they began eating with their own thoughts. Only her grandmother would occasionally stare at Jinwan's face because she looked too much like her mother when she was young. Jinwan, you're not young anymore. You should be in your 20s, right? Her aunt sat down and glanced at Jinwan. Seeing that she was not wearing any jewelry, nor did she have any engagement rings, she immediately raised her brows. Oh, that's right. 24. Here, those who are over 25 and still haven't married are considered old ladies. You're not married yet? Don't you have a man? Chapter 6:18. Why are you looking at me? Seeing Jinwan's lukewarm gaze, her aunt could tell that Jinwan's temper was similar to her mother's. Although she appeared calm on the surface, she actually had a temper in her bones. She immediately snorted. I'm just being concerned. After all, for people like you who come from wealthy families, even if no one really likes you for the sake of money and marriage, you'll most likely be able to get married. It's just that I don't know what kind of person you'll end up marrying. Speaking up to this point, first aunt sighed again. I've heard that in the marriages between rich and powerful families, many young ladies are married to old men with big bellies and bald heads. When I think about how you might live such a life in the future, I also feel sorry for your mother. And you must have watched too many bitter TV dramas. Usually, only these kinds of inferior TV dramas would produce such plots of people hating the rich. The daughters of wealthy families all have miserable marriages, and the descendants of wealthy families never have good endings. After all, such plots are mostly used to satisfy the mentality of ordinary people at the bottom of society. That's why there's no lack of brainwashed directors who produce such things and broadcast them to brainwash people. Jinwan calmly ate as she calmly said, but in reality, I believe that when Aunt visited the Ji family many years ago, you should have seen it before. Her aunt's expression immediately froze because of Jinwan's clear praise and hidden criticism. Back then, when they visited the Ji family, they had naturally seen a true wealthy family. Although it was not as exaggerated as those portrayed in TV dramas, it was truly a wealthy family. The people living in that kind of place, regardless of whether it was money, background, or even character, they could not compare to them. Indeed, there were no rotten old men. At that time, they had also met some of the relatives and friends who interacted with the Ji family. Those people's children were all well educated. Aside from some who were spoiled and willful, most of them were well educated. They were not people ordinary people could compare to. Her aunt held her shoulders, suppressing her anger with a smile. That's true. Marrying a rotten old man is indeed too unrealistic. After all, your looks are still passable. At the very least, you'll be able to marry a rich family's playboy. Jinwan didn't answer. Anyway, no matter what she said, this aunt could find something to comfort her own unbalanced heart. Although this was a small city, fortunately, Jinwan was used to these home-cooked meals. Except for her grandmother who couldn't eat well because of her health, the tableware was clean. While eating, Jinwan wanted to take away her mother's things as soon as possible and leave as soon as possible. There was no need to stay here for too long. At this moment, her grandmother spoke up. Jinwan, if you're free in the future, come back to G City more often. If you need anything, we can help you. Hearing her grandmother's words, Jinwan just listened. What could she possibly need their help with? First aunt suddenly chimed in. Cece and Kiki will be graduating from university in 2 years. By then, they'll definitely need to spend a lot of money to find a job. If you're well off, why don't you leave some money for them this time? Consider it as helping your 2 cousins. Mom, after we graduate, We'll need to change into more presentable clothes and necessities when we find a job or something, Song Cici interjected. That's right, Jinwan. In any case, you don't lack money. The gifts you bought this time shouldn't be cheap. There's no need to be so wasteful. Why don't you just give them cash? Speaking up to here, her aunt paused. It's not much. For your 2 cousins, 100,000 yuan each is enough. Leave us 200,000 before you leave. What do you think? If there's anything we need in the future, we'll call you again. The moment Song Cici and Song Kiki heard 200,000 yuan, their eyes lit up. They exchanged glances and gently pushed each other. The two of them joked around for a while, clearly secretly delighted. Her grandmother nodded. That's right. After all, we're the only relatives left in your mother. Your aunt isn't an outsider either. We should help each other out. Jinwan, you've been living in a big city and have seen many people. If you meet any men with good family backgrounds, don't forget to introduce them to Cici and Kiki. The people cousin knows must all be rich people. Song Kiki placed her bowl and chopsticks down. By the way, I didn't dare to touch them earlier. I saw an especially expensive laptop in cousin's luggage. Sister will be lacking a laptop when we're staying at school, right? The moment Song Kiki finished speaking, everyone's gaze focused on Jinwan. Jinwan's gaze was indifferent. She did not meet their gazes at all. She naturally curved her lips and smiled mildly. I came all the way to G City and even brought my laptop with me. There must be something important that I need to do. There's work information inside and it's all quite important. The moment she heard these words, Song Kiki, who was originally excited that she would agree to it, immediately fell. Her aunt glanced at her again. You have a job? Jinwan also glanced at her. You know that I'm not young anymore. Is it strange to have a job? Not only did she have a job, it was a job worth tens of billions. However, she could not say it here. Otherwise, this family might think of a way to drink her blood. 200,000 yuan? Haha, if her mother did not intend to help this so-called family back then, Jinwan would now understand why her mother was not close to her family. Since her mother had never helped them, there was no way she would satisfy their request of 200,000 yuan. Let alone 200,000 yuan, she would not even give them 20,000 yuan. After all, if this matter started, they would ask for money endlessly in the future. Did these people treat her as an ATM? Even if she gave 200,000 yuan to a beggar, they would not stay here. Her aunt wanted to say something, and her 2 cousins also wanted to say something. However, Jinwan did not respond at all and focused on eating. The atmosphere at the dining table became slightly awkward. Of course, the one feeling awkward was not Jinwan, but the others who clearly wanted to speak but were ignored time and time again. In the end, the meal was tasteless. Jinwan, on the other hand, was full. She stood up and went to her mother's room. She saw that it was still as messy as before. Song Kiki said that she would tidy it up, but in reality she had no intention of giving up the room. How could she possibly tidy it up? Seeing that Jinwan had entered the room to tidy up and even brought out her mother's yellowed photos, Song Kiki gave Song Cici a look. The 2 sisters stood up and left. Chapter 619. The 2 sisters held onto their phones and looked at the report on Jinwan's ranking on Forbes this year. However, they could only see a photo from an interview. The person smiling calmly in the photo did look similar to Jinwan, but the report was written in English. Even the name was the English name Jinwan used when she was in London. They could not understand what was written and could only stare at the photo for a long time. Song Kiki said, "In the afternoon, I didn't know which website I clicked on, but a page suddenly popped up and saw this small photo hanging in the corner. When I clicked on it, I didn't expect it to be such a large report. Do you think the person in this photo is Jinwan?" Song Cici stared at it for a long time. She felt that although the photos looked very similar, any random photo had been photoshopped. It was too bright and she could only make out about 70 to 80% of their faces. Furthermore, all the beauties looked the same. Perhaps it was just that they looked similar. She pointed to the English words on the photo. Although I don't know much about the others, you should at least know about London's Forbes ranking, right? Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone to school for so many years. Looking at these words, I think it's an interview with a female entrepreneur in London. Why would a rich young lady like Jinwan run to London instead of enjoying her life in High City? Isn't she always in High City? She said earlier that she has a job, so the person in this photo can't be her. The two's conversation shifted from the photo to Jinwan, and then to the clothes. Finally, they quickly discussed how they would spend the 200,000 yuan. The 2 were rocking back and forth in laughter when the door opened. Jinwan walked out and looked at the 2 sisters who had been chatting in the yard. She said calmly and mildly, "The room is ready. Can I change to another room? Song Kiki was stunned. She subconsciously looked toward Song Sisi. Song Sisi stepped forward. Cousin, didn't you say you would stay in another room tonight? Why are you suddenly changing rooms? I was too tired when I arrived in the afternoon and went to rest. Didn't Kiki say she was going to tidy up? I saw that she didn't have time to tidy up, so I cleaned up after dinner. You can change now. Jinwan smiled lightly. The sooner you change, the easier it'll be. You won't have to go through all that trouble tomorrow. Song Sisi and Song Kiki, but my things are still here, Jinwan interrupted Song Kiki's words. I've tidied everything up for you. There are only a few clothes on the bed as well as your blanket, phone charger and the like. I've helped you fold them neatly. In a while you can bring them back to Sisi's room or to another room. After all, that used to be my mother's room. Since I'm back, it's only right for me to stay there. But it's already so late and I'm still hugging my blanket and changing rooms. That's too. It's okay. Let Sisi help you. It'll be quick. Then where should I sleep? Sisi's room is cramped. After we grew up, we rarely stayed together. After all, the bed wasn't that big. Ask your mother to arrange another room for you. You can't always sleep in my mother's room, right? Jinwan was still smiling, but she slowed down the speed at which she said, my mother. The two sisters heard her deliberate reminder and did not say anything else. Cousin, I see that your luggage is also in another room today. Kiki is used to sleeping in little aunt's room, so it's better to let Kiki stay there. You've only been back for a few days, so there's no need to change rooms. Song Sisi said. No. Jinwan straightforwardly rejected. I need time to tidy up my mother's belongings. Kiki will always be staying there, and it won't be convenient for me to tidy up. What if she loses a phone charger and asks me to compensate for her phone? Ha, cousin, you really know how to joke. Why would I ask you to compensate for my phone? Song Kiki and Song Sisi exchanged glances. Their expressions were slightly awkward. Actually, they had thought of this method before. Jinwan could not even be bothered to continue arguing with them. She turned around and brought her luggage into her mother's room. Seeing that they were relatives, Jinwan could still tolerate them a little. However, now that she saw how vile this family was, she naturally could not take another step back. Seeing that she was so insistent, Song Kiki could only leave. However, Song Sisi held her back and threw an unhappy expression at Jinwan. She then turned around and left. Jinwan ignored her. After entering the room, she made the bed again. Thankfully, there were new blankets and pillows in the cabinet. Although she did not know how long they had been in the cabinet, they still looked relatively clean. Previously, Song Kiki had most likely treated this room as a game room. Aside from Song Kiki staying here, it was likely that she had played here with her classmates and friends. Every time Jinwan swept the floor, she would find some things under the cabinets. There were even some old playing cards. Although her mother had passed away many years ago, there were so many rooms that could have been used. Yet they had to choose this room. She did not know what intentions they had. It was clear that they did not have the slightest bit of respect for their deceased aunt. Thankfully, this room was separate. Aside from a small door inside, there was also a main door that led to the courtyard. Jinwan directly locked the small door from the inside. She planned to enter and leave through the main door for the next 2 days. However, because Jinwan had forcefully changed rooms and cleaned up her mother's things one by one, Jinwan was even more disliked in the eyes of this family. She did not know what her aunt had secretly said to her grandmother. The next morning, when her grandmother saw that Jinwan had just woken up and was about to get some water to wash up, her gaze was not as happy. During breakfast, she heard her aunt discussing with her grandmother about repairing the room with the broken window. They wanted to fix the window as well to prevent Song Kiki from feeling uncomfortable. The moment her grandmother heard that her granddaughter was uncomfortable and was chased to that room by Jinwan, she immediately maneuvered her wheelchair back to her room. She took out 5 not-so-new 100 yuan bills from her piggy bank and handed them to her aunt, asking her to fix it. Yesterday afternoon, when Jinwan was sleeping there, this family did not take the initiative to fix it. They were all granddaughters, but this treatment, haha. Jinwan's impression of her mother when she was young was that she was a talented, beautiful, and opinionated woman. She was born into such a family and environment, yet she was able to study abroad with her scholarship. This meant that her mother was indeed impressive. At the very least, she did not suffer much because of such a family environment. Instead, she knew how to fly out of this place. Chapter 620. Originally, Jinwan planned to leave the next afternoon. However, her grandmother suddenly felt unwell. Her aunt instructed Jinwan to call someone to send her to the hospital. Her intention was for Jinwan to pay for the treatment. Jinwan did not mind. Seeing that her grandmother was seriously ill, she directly called for a car to send her to the hospital. After struggling for a day and a night, she finally returned from the hospital. Her grandmother was only suffering from some elderly ailments and a slight chill from the autumn weather. She was fine. After sending her grandmother back from the hospital, she had just alighted from the car when she saw her aunt hanging out clothes in the yard. Two of them were the dresses that the two sisters had taken from Jinwan. It was likely that they had been washed because they were dirty. Those two clothes could only be dry cleaned and could not be washed with water. Although they could still be worn after washing, they would no longer have their original shape. In any case, they would be very ugly. Jinwan only glanced at them and did not speak. When her aunt saw that they had returned, she asked about the old lady's condition. Knowing that she was fine, she did not ask further. After helping her grandmother back to her room to rest, Jinwan turned around and saw that Song Kiki was chewing on a lollipop. She seemed to be looking for something, but when she saw that Jinwan had returned, her gaze faltered. Jinwan seemed to notice something from her gaze. She abruptly rushed over and pushed open the door to Song Sisi's room. As expected, she saw that Song Sisi had placed Jinwan's laptop on her desk. However, Jinwan's work computer had a password. The two sisters had not been able to figure out the password and had even spilled water on the keyboard. The moment Jinwan saw the darkened screen and the water stains on the keyboard, her temples began to thump. Cousin. Seeing that Jinwan's expression was not good, Song Kiki stood by the door and did not dare to speak. Song Sisi also rushed to move away from the computer. She turned to see Jinwan walking over expressionlessly and rushed to say, "Cousin, I was just curious. I've only seen such an expensive computer in advertisements before, but I've never switched it on. We didn't see your work documents either. But this water. I really didn't mean to spill it. It's all Keek's fault for snatching it from me. That's why I accidentally." Jinwan pursed her lips, picked up the computer and turned to leave. Seeing that Jinwan had left, the two sisters sighed. Song Sisi even muttered softly, "Tisich, what are you pretending for?" Jinwan had already locked the small door from the inside. If she wanted to return to her mother's room, she had to walk outside. Earlier, when she walked out with the computer with a dark expression, her aunt was still hanging clothes. When she turned back and saw Jinwan's expression, she immediately knew what had happened. However, she did not apologize for her two daughters but said with dissatisfaction, "Aya, we haven't been able to buy a computer at home. Sisi and Kiki were curious, so they took your computer to play. I heard that you set a password to prevent others from looking at it. Now that you've taken it back, is there a need to put on such an ugly expression?" Jinua. And, SG she did not say she returned. And returned. Nguyen she returned. Uncle. Mo Chin G2. She had GGG. Nguyen G had to said. B. And had he. B. GG and. She could leave now. There was nothing wrong with the computer. She had a backup in the company. It was just that it was flooded. Even if she waited for it to dry, she did not know if it could still be used. It might affect her work, but it was not a big deal. But at this time, even if she bought a train ticket from G-City to the airport, it would only be available tomorrow morning. Even if she arrived at the airport, there were not many flights in this small city. There was only one flight to High City a day, which was tomorrow afternoon. It was already past time. She could only wait until tomorrow. Jinwan endured until the sky turned dark. She planned to leave early the next morning. Yesterday, when she was taking care of her grandmother in the hospital, there were too many sick elderly people in the small hospital. There were not many beds. She was squeezed into a room with more than 10 people. The people around her kept coughing and the air was foul. She must have caught a cold, or perhaps she did not have a good rest yesterday. She felt dizzy, so she did not have dinner with them. She only went to get some hot water and gave herself a simple wipe in the room. She did not complain that this place was not convenient for her to bathe. Instead, it was her aunt who nagged at her for being too clean and always boiling water for her to bathe. It rained at night. Although G-City was not as cold as Jing City, it was still autumn. The night was still chilly. There was no air conditioning or heating in the room. Jinwan had caught a cold in the hospital yesterday. In fact, it had only been a few days since she had a high fever in Jing City. At 9 o'clock at night, Jinwan's stomach was not feeling well. However, those people did not have any leftover food. She got up, grabbed an umbrella, and walked a long way to a small supermarket to buy a bowl of instant noodles. The rainy night was not easy to walk, not to mention the muddy path. Her pants were wet and stuck to her legs. Her shoes were also soaked. The The cold of the autumn rain was bone-piercing. Jinwan stepped through the mud all the way back. The family slept early. It was not even 10 o'clock and the lights in the other rooms were already off. Jinwan couldn't imagine what her mother had experienced when she lived in this place more than 20 years ago, nor could she imagine what kind of story her mother had with Ji Hongwen and Xiao Jinjuan, but this place made her inexplicably feel like she was trapped in a prison. The heavy rain and the road that didn't even have a street lamp in the distance were like a big net that could trap many people here for the rest of their lives. When she rushed back, Jinwan was already drenched. The rain was too heavy. She dragged her cold body back, slightly regretting running so far to buy instant noodles. Just as she was hesitating if she should find a kettle to boil the noodles, she suddenly sneezed. Jinwan raised her hand to rub her nose. She removed her wet clothes and wiped the rain away. She crawled under the blanket to warm herself up. However, after lying down, she only felt her body alternating between hot and cold. The familiar dizziness of being afraid of the cold and having a fever assaulted her. After an unknown period of time, Jinwan seemed to hear her phone ringing in her daze. She shivered under the blanket. She wanted to open her eyes, but her body was alternating between hot and cold. No matter how hard she tried, she could not open her eyes. The rain fell for the entire night and finally stopped when it was close to dawn. On the bumpy path, a black car drove over. There was no one around in the wee hours of the morning. Only the slightly brightening sky reflected the cold light of the car. Chapter 621. In her sleep, Jinwan heard her cell phone ringing again. She poked her head out of the quilt and tried to reach out to pick up her cell phone, but she only touched the edge of the cell phone and then put her hand down weakly, no longer moving. She was very cold, very sleepy, very tired, and did not have any strength. Finally there was a knock on the door. Jinwan furrowed her brows in her sleep. She turned over and glanced toward the door. Although it was already past dawn and there was some light, she could not see clearly in the room. She could only see the wooden door being knocked on. The person outside did not knock very loudly, and since they were outside she was probably the only one who could hear it. Jinwan wanted to speak, but her throat was painful. She looked toward the door and her vision blurred. As the door creaked slightly, she closed her eyes again. He had been knocking on the door for more than 5 minutes, but there was still no movement. Shinmu stood outside the door with some worry. He turned to look at Mo Jingshan, who was dressed in a black coat. The reason Mo Jingshan was certain that Jinwan was staying in this room was because of the heavy rain last night. There were footprints in the mud outside that led directly to this room. There was also a pair of shoes that Jinwan used to wear. However, the shoes were already soaked and there was mud around the heels. They were left outside the door. She was most likely afraid of dirtying the floor. The lights in the other rooms were not turned on. Only this room's light was on. It seemed like it had not been extinguished all night. However, after knocking for so long with Jinwan's usual alertness, it was impossible that she did not hear it. Also, Jinwan's cell phone was in it. Every time he called, her cell phone would ring. Although the ringtone was very soft and wouldn't wake up the people living next door, the familiar ringtone confirmed Mo Jingshan's suspicion that Jinwan was indeed here. We've been knocking for so long. Mo, could it be that Miss Ji only left her phone inside and is not in this room? Shenmu saw Mo Jingshan's cold and heavy expression and hesitated for a moment before speaking. No, in this kind of place she wouldn't leave her phone too far away. The man's voice was cold and calm after a rainy night. But this door? Open the lock. Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at the wooden door that was locked from the inside. Shenmu hesitated for a moment before turning around to look for something to pry open the door. They definitely wouldn't be able to find a locksmith in this place, and it would be too late to call the police now. Furthermore, in this kind of place each family's yard was next to each other. If they were to openly open the door and enter, it would only arouse the suspicion of the surrounding neighbors and family members. It would also cause a lot of trouble, and at that time, it would probably affect Miss G badly. But this lock, this kind of door was indeed not as difficult to open as the security doors outside, but Shinmu really did not have any experience in picking locks. He found 2 iron wires and a thin wooden board, and after looking at the door for a long time, he tried to use the iron wire to look for the lock position. Shinmu was hooking the iron wire back and forth in front of the door. He also took a thin wooden board and placed it in the gap of the door to enlarge the gap. Mo Jingshan stood by the side, coldly staring at the wet and muddy shoes outside the door. The weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a hint of worry. Yesterday afternoon he took a flight from Jing City back to High City. After returning to the company for a 2-hour meeting, he did not have any time to rest and immediately rushed to G City. There was only one flight a day from High City to G City. Even if they were to rush to the airport and wait for the boarding time, the fastest speed they could reach by car was only 2 hours. Thus, they decided to drive overnight from High City. Jinwan was not stubborn about her birth. This time she suddenly came to G City. It was likely that Ji Hongwen had said something to her. Otherwise, she would not have suddenly come to such a place. For a wooden door in such a small place, the lock on the inside could be considered easy to open. However, due to the iron wire being hooked back and forth, there would still be some slight movements. If it wasn't for the fact that the person inside was not alert, they would have long woken up. The sound of the lock being unlocked came from the inside. Shinmu released a long breath. It seemed like if he wanted to change careers in the future, there might be a place for him in the locksmith industry. COMO, Shinmu pulled out the iron wire, turning back to look at Mo Jingshin. The man's gaze finally landed on the pair of muddy shoes. He directly pushed the door open and quickly stepped in. Shinmu did not dare to enter. After all, if Jinwan was really sleeping inside, it would definitely be inconvenient for him to enter. Thus, he very consciously waited outside the door while glancing around. The sky had yet to fully brighten and most of the people here were still asleep. The light in the room was emitted from an old yellow light bulb. It was not very bright, but at least he could see clearly. The moment Mo Jingshin entered the door, the first thing he saw was the wet clothes that Jinwan had thrown on the ground. There was also a plastic bag with a bowl of instant noodles that had not been eaten. There was also an umbrella that had fallen on the ground and was covered with water stains. When he turned to the side, he saw a very ordinary single bed. Jinwan was lying on the bed, covered with a quilt. She lay there motionlessly, with only one bare white arm stretched out and landing by her phone. She did not have time to retract it, but maintain this position. Her brows seemed to be furrowed due to discomfort, and her cheeks were red. It was very similar to how she looked when she had a high fever all night in Jing City. Mo Jingshin approached the bed and placed his hand on Jinwan's forehead. As expected, it was very hot. Every year from summer to autumn, she had to pay special attention to her body temperature. Her body was afraid of the cold, and her old illness of catching a cold and having a fever had not been cured. In the past few months, the weather in China was already hot, but in just a few days she actually had a fever several times. Mo Jingshin could not help but wonder how she had managed to survive in London for 3 years when the temperature was constantly maintained. Jinwan. The man moved his hand away from her forehead and pressed it against her burning cheeks. He bent down slightly to call her name. Jinwan furrowed her brows and did not open her eyes. Instead, she turned over slightly. When she turned over, the corner of the quilt around her opened a little, and Mo Jingshin immediately saw that she was not wearing any clothes under the quilt. He then glanced at the wet clothes on the ground. It was easy to guess that she must have taken off her clothes and laid down last night after being drenched in the rain. The man's expression darkened. He bent down and scooped out the burning woman who was curled up under the quilt. Chapter 622. Mo Jingshin's expression turned even uglier. He removed his black coat and wrapped it around the scorching and naked woman. At the same time, he instructed Shinmu, who was waiting by the door. "Shinmu, go to the car and bring a thin blanket over." Shinmu made a sound of acknowledgement and turned to retrieve a thin blanket from the car. This was the air conditioning blanket in the car. It was rarely used, but right now it could be put to good use. When he entered, Jinwan was currently in Mo Jingshin's arms. Her eyes were closed and she appeared to be unconscious. She was wrapped in a black coat, and there was nothing that should not be seen. However, Shinmu still handed the blanket over and turned to quickly leave. Mo Jingshin used the thin blanket to wrap Jinwan's body from top to bottom. He then wrapped the coat around her and directly carried her by the waist, walking out. It was no longer raining outside, but the roads were still muddy. When Mo Jingshin carried the person in his arms to the car, Shinmu reached out to open the car door. Mo Jingshin carried her into the back seat. At the same time, he did not intend to put her down. He calmly instructed, "To the hospital." G City was a very small city. It was difficult to find a hospital with a good environment. Furthermore, ever since Jinwan was carried out, she had been unconscious. Shinmu turned on the GPS and passed by a nearby hospital. It was the same hospital that Jinwan had previously accompanied her grandmother to see a doctor. After taking a look, he felt that the environment was too bad and quickly drove past it. He headed for the largest hospital in G City 10 kilometers away. The sky had just brightened and there were not many people outside the hospital. The doctor on duty on the first floor of the hospital had just walked out when he suddenly saw a luxury car parked in front of the hospital. The back door of the car opened and a tall man carried a woman out. The woman was wrapped in a blanket and a black coat, and her face could not be seen clearly. However, the man's face was so cold that it seemed as if ice could form on it. Emergency, call the doctor. Shenmu hurriedly followed after parking the car. When Mo Jingshan carried Jinwan in, he turned to speak to the doctor who was standing outside in a daze. The doctor finally reacted and rushed to follow them to the emergency hall. Jinwan had been sleeping the entire time. It was only when the needle was pricked on the back of her hand that she opened her eyes due to the faint pain. However, she only opened her eyes a little, and her gaze was somewhat dazed and blurry. She could vaguely hear someone saying, "Virus flu." Did the patient come into contact with an unhygienic environment with a large number of flu germs these days? Her body's immune system isn't very good. She caught a cold at the same time, so it's inevitable that she would suddenly have a high fever. Who's talking? Who has a fever? Is she? How could he have a fever again? Before she could figure it out, Jinwan's consciousness gradually sank into the darkness again. She slept for a long time and had a dream. She actually dreamed of Mo Jingshan? She was in G City. How could there be Mo Jingshan? Why did she dream of him for no reason? In her dream, Mo Jingshan sat by the bedside. He picked up the cotton swab the doctor brought over, dipped it in water, and placed it on her dry, white lips to moisten them. Mo Jingshan's complexion was not very good. Especially when the doctor came in to take her temperature once more and discovered that her fever had not subsided, his complexion could no longer be described as ugly. Jinwan thought that she was dreaming, alternating between waking and sleeping. This hospital was G City's top A hospital, and the doctor's skills were not bad. Based on her current condition, they could not torture her too much. They could only give her an injection here to reduce her fever and could not move her elsewhere. She could not endure such torment. The woman's hand was pricked with a needle, and there was an IV drip by the bedside. Occasionally she would furrow her brows and moan uncomfortably. It seemed like she was trying to wake up but was unable to wake up. Shenmu went to buy some porridge. By the time he returned, it was already past 10 in the morning. Jinwan had not woken up and was still sleeping. Mo Jingshan had already changed into clean clothes. They were made of warm and soft material. This was a hospital gown, and Mo Jingshan did not plan on letting Jinwan wear it. "Sio Mo, I've bought the porridge, but I'm afraid Miss Ji won't be able to drink it right now." "Put it down first." Shenmu did not say more. He walked over to put the porridge down and carefully opened the lid. He placed the clean disposable spoon by the side. Mo Jingshan used the towel to wipe Jinwan's face. His hand once again touched her forehead and cheeks. She had always been like this. Whenever she caught a cold or had a fever, it would last for a long time. A few days ago, he had been paying attention to her in Jing City to prevent her from having a fever again. In the end, she had only been away from him for a few days. Several years ago, when she had a fever in the Yu Garden, he and Andy Chen had taken care of her. With someone by her side, she was fine. However, last night, this woman had a high fever in her room and no one cared about her. If he had not rushed over in time, she most likely would have developed pneumonia in such a place. "Sio Mo, you returned from Jing City to High City for a meeting, and then rushed over here. You haven't rested at all. I'll take care of her here. Why don't you rest for a while?" Shenmu softly said. Mo Jingshan glanced at the person on the bed and softly said, "There's no need. You go rest. I'll take care of her." Although Shenmu had driven all the way from High City and ran back and forth, the occasional fatigue on his body could not compare to Sio Mo's mental exhaustion. After leaving Jing City, he had not rested at all. When he came over, he only pretended to take a nap in the car and did not sleep at all. Mo Jingshan took the bowl of porridge and used a disposable spoon to scoop out the thinner rice soup. He placed it by Jinwan's mouth and slowly fed it into her mouth. Although Jinwan was unconscious, it was only because of the high fever that she couldn't open her eyes. It wasn't to the extent that she couldn't even swallow. However, because she was lying down, some soup would flow out of her mouth. Mo Jingshan patiently picked up a tissue to wipe her mouth and then slowly fed her, spoonful by spoonful. From the bowl of unopened instant noodles left on the ground in Jinwan's room, he could tell that she did not eat anything yesterday. If she was not so hungry or had a stomachache, she would not have braved the rain to buy food. This so-called grandmother's home. She had returned to stay for 2 to 3 days, but she did not even eat dinner. Her high fever was not discovered by anyone, and she even caught a cold. The moment he thought of Jinwan's life in G City and those relatives who did not give her any family treatment, Mo Jingshan's gaze became even colder. His movements of feeding Jinwan's soup slowed down. Chapter 623. You're awake. The man's voice came from the bedside. Jinwan paused for a moment before her vision cleared up. She turned to look at the man dressed in a black shirt by the bedside. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, as though she had pressed against him when he carried her to the hospital. If you're awake, open your mouth. Eat the porridge first. You're still receiving injections. An empty stomach isn't good for your stomach. The man's low voice came again. Jinwan's gaze focused on Mo Jingshan. She was slightly confused. Where was this? Wasn't she in G City? Wasn't Mo Jingshan in Jing City? But why was he here? Was she still dreaming or was she not in G City? Although there were a lot of things in her mind that she didn't understand, she opened her mouth consciously and cooperated with the man's action of feeding her porridge. She ate a lot of porridge in small mouthfuls. She felt much more comfortable as her stomach was no longer empty. Half a bowl of porridge was fed to her. A moment later, Mo Jingshan stood up and returned. He helped her up to lean against the headboard, placed a straw in a cup of warm water, and brought it to her mouth for her to drink. Jinwan had a fever for an entire night and was already dehydrated. After drinking a lot of water, she coughed several times. It wasn't until the man's hand patiently patted her back that she pursed her pale lips and raised her eyes to look at him with wide, round eyes. Why are you here? Mo Jingshan's expression was as calm as usual. When he heard her slightly hoarse voice, he brought the water to her mouth for her to drink. Jinwan cooperated and drank a few more mouthfuls. As she was drinking, she heard the man patiently feeding her say mildly, "If I weren't here by the time you returned to High City, you would have already turned into a fool from a fever." Cough. Jinwan raised her uninjected hand and glanced at the surroundings of the ward. This was the best ward in the hospital in G City. She then saw the sign of G City Central Hospital by the side of the bed and realized that she was still in G City. That was why Mo Jingshan had even come to a small place like G City. When did you come? Jinwan struggled to speak in a hoarse voice. After speaking, she coughed several times. Mo Jingshan reached out to gently pat her back. Don't be in a hurry to ask. Let's talk about it first. After coughing for a while, Jinwan hurriedly took the water he handed her and took a big gulp. Then she felt better and leaned against the headboard. Because of the needle in her hand, she couldn't move and could only look at him. Seeing that she was staring at him, it was clear that she still wanted to ask. Mo Jingshan calmly said, "I knew you were in G City, so I came to take a look. I didn't expect that you wouldn't pick up my call since last night. I rushed to your place in the wee hours of the morning and forced the door open. You were lying under the blankets with a burning body. Even if a burglar entered, I'm afraid we wouldn't know." Jinwan's eyelids twitched. Break the door? The man's cold brows moved. You should be glad that I was the one who pried the door open and not someone else. Jinwan, as the CEO of America's Shine Group, not only did he come to this small city where even birds wouldn't shit, he actually learned how to pry open doors. Jinwan lowered her head to look at the clothes on her body. She recalled the scene of her taking off her wet clothes and burrowing into the blankets yesterday and did not say anything. She glanced at the drip of medicine in the drip and glanced out the window. She hoarsely asked, "What time is it now?" Not even 11. Did you drive here? Or by plane? She could not imagine the scene of Boss Missouri flying to G City and then squeezing into a train with others to come to this small city. Driving. As expected, Great Boss Missouri would never squeeze into a train in such a small town. Although she did want to see this scene, she did not expect to see it. I originally planned to return to High City this afternoon, but I didn't expect to have a fever again. As Jinwan spoke, she raised her hand to touch her forehead. However, she was already running a fever and the temperature of her hand was not low. She could not feel anything. She placed her hand down in frustration and did not have the mood to continue arguing with Mo Jingshan. She only said, "My luggage and computer are still at my grandmother's house. If I can leave the hospital in the afternoon, I still have to retrieve my luggage." Putting aside the current relationship between her and Mo Jingshan, she really did not plan on staying at her grandmother's house anymore. The sooner she could leave, the sooner she could. Even if she had to sit in Mo Jingshan's car, that would be fine. There's no rush. We'll talk about it after you've recovered. Right now, aside from a fever, you also have a cold. You have to rest for at least 2 days. Leave your luggage here first. Either call Shinmu to retrieve it or I'll accompany you. Mo Jingshan watched her patiently. Let's focus on recuperating your body that easily falls sick in the cool autumn weather first. Everything else is secondary. Jinwan indeed felt that her nose was suffocating. Previously, when she accompanied her grandmother to the hospital, the people around them kept coughing and sneezing. She knew that it was not a good thing. She had indeed been infected. She coughed once more and raised her hand to press against her aching throat. She rubbed her throat as she said, "The place I stayed in last night was my mother's old room. I've already put away all the things in her room. I don't plan on returning to this place in the future." She couldn't tell if she wanted to vent her pent-up emotions or explain why she came to G City. However, after saying this, she raised her eyes only to see that the man only patiently patted her back and poured her a glass of warm water due to her sore throat. When he returned to the bed, he asked her, "Do you feel better now?" Jinwan's eyes lit up. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't know what to say. Jinwan nodded. Much better. At the very least, she felt much more comfortable than last night when she was drenched and cold from running back with an umbrella. Perhaps it was because she drank too much water after waking up. Previously, when she was asleep, she had been on an 4-drip. After just a short while, Jinwan felt the urge to go to the toilet. However, she was too embarrassed to say it. "Can I get off the bed first?" Jinwan asked as she looked at the remaining medicine in the bottle. "Why do you want to get off the bed?" She did not say it, but she was truly suffocating. She straightened her body and prepared to get off the bed. The man saw that she was clearly weak but still insisted on getting off the bed. He immediately saw through her intentions. "You want to go to the bathroom?" Jinwan was silent. She had only just sat up. How could he see through her? Jinwan did not move. The needle in her hand prevented her from moving. She lowered her eyes to look at the back of her hand, feeling conflicted about how she should go. Chapter 624. It was very awkward. Under Mo Jingshan's amused gaze, Jinwan could only raise her hand. "I want to go to the bathroom." The man's brows moved slightly. He chuckled lightly because she had finally taken the initiative to ask for his help. It was also because of her soft tone. Jinwan, on the other hand, cursed this man in her heart over and over again. Yet, when Great Boss Missouri finally reached out to help her up, she still had to maintain a pleading smile on her face. Mo Jingshan did not only help her up. When the nurse pushed open the door and entered, he asked the nurse to come over and help take the medicine bottle. He then carried Jinwan up. The young nurse raised the medicine bottle and followed behind. She watched as the tall and handsome man carried her into the bathroom, and her eyes shone with envy. When she saw him carry Jinwan into the bathroom, she was so envious that her face turned red. It was rare to see such a good-looking man who doted on his girlfriend so much. Furthermore, this man's identity was not ordinary. From his dressing, aura, speech, and gaze, it was clear that he was not a simple person. He should be his girlfriend, right? Or a couple. Either way, the two of them looked so young. They were either dating or newly married. Otherwise, how could they be so affectionate? Even when going to the bathroom, he had to carry her. The young nurse raised the bottle outside the door and cursed silently. Finally, the bathroom door opened again. When Jinwan was carried out, her face was suspiciously red. The young nurse instantly understood. Usually, patients who were hospitalized for injections because they were not feeling well often needed their family members to help them take off their pants when they went to the bathroom. Earlier on, this gentleman was most likely helping her take off her pants. This was clearly a common occurrence in the hospital. However, the two people before her did not seem to match the image of a patient being taken care of in the hospital. This scene she did not dare to imagine. The more she thought about it, the more her maiden heart was about to overflow. After being carried back to the bed, the nurse helped hang the medicine bottle by the bedside. Jinwan thanked her, and Mo Jingshan nodded slightly at the nurse. The young nurse continued to leave with a red face. Jinwan took another look at her cell phone, which was placed by the bed, but she didn't see anything else. She guessed that when Mo Jingshan took her away, she must have been unconscious at that time, so he only took her cell phone with him. Everything else was still in that room. When she was there, the family couldn't wait to search her inside and out. Now that she was gone and suddenly disappeared, it was likely that many things in her bag would be searched again. "I'll go back in the afternoon to get my things," Jinwan said. "What do you have?" "Just send Shinmu over to get it." "I'll have to take everything in my suitcase and bag with me, but I'm guessing that some important items will be found by my two weird cousins. I'll have to go back and look for them myself, lest I miss anything." Actually, he could leave these matters to Shinmu. However, hearing Jinwan's words, Mo Jingshan only glanced at her and softly said, "Let's talk about it after your fever subsides. I'll accompany you back." Thankfully, Jinwan cooperated and drank more hot water. After the anti-inflammatory and fever medicine was administered, it took another hour for Jinwan's fever to subside. It was already noon. Before Jinwan decided to return, Shinmu had gone to buy some lunch. He allowed Jinwan to eat a little to replenish her energy. She could finally get off the bed and plan to head back to get her things. At her grandmother's house. When everyone woke up early in the morning, they discovered that Jinwan had disappeared. The door was also open. The lock on the wooden door was not clear, so no one was able to guess how Jinwan had left. There were no signs of anyone else entering either. They only saw that her cell phone was gone, so they assumed that she had gone out to buy something. After all, her bag and luggage were still at home. Song Sisi and Song Kiki were used to treating this room as a game room. Seeing that Jinwan was not around, they openly walked in and circled around. They only grew suspicious when they saw the wet clothes on the floor. However, not long after, Song Kiki suddenly spoke up from the side. "Big sister, look at these." Song Sisi turned to see that Song Kiki was holding onto Jinwan's wallet. She had just found it from Jinwan's bag. There were several cards in the wallet, including some business-related financial cards, gold and silver cards, and a black card. Jinwan had yet to step out of the hospital when her phone received several messages from the bank. Most of them were regarding the bank's PIN being entered incorrectly, causing the bank to treat it as lost and freeze the card number. It didn't matter if the card number was frozen. After returning to High City, she could take some time to go to the bank to complete the procedures. However, she never expected that after leaving her bag at home for only a few hours, this family actually dared to touch her wallet and swipe her card. Thankfully, her PIN was not her birthday, nor was it some numbers that these people could guess. Otherwise, it was likely that this family would not have used her card to swipe a few million yuan. The two sisters were in a certain shopping mall in G City. They held various receipts in their hands and were about to pay. However, no matter how they tried, they could not guess the correct PIN. In the end, only the black card was left. The passwords were all wrong. The two sisters were angered to the point of turning green. This kind of black card was used by some banks as a supreme VIP card. Without a deposit of more than 10 million yuan, it was impossible for the bank to issue such a card. Moreover, this card was also divided into several levels. One was the supreme card with a certain amount of deposit, and the other was the global unlimited secondary card. It could be swiped anywhere, and even if the money in the card was not enough, it could be swiped without a limit. The owner of this card had to be trusted by the major banks to be able to use it. When they were at home, they specially used their phones to check online. Anyway, no matter what grade the card was, it was enough to prove that Jinwan was really rich. Because of this, the two of them ran out with Jinwan's wallet. Even if they did not know the PIN, Jinwan's wallet still had her ID card. Originally, they wanted to take the ID card to the bank to withdraw money, but the bank refused because they were not the real person. In the end, the two of them took the card and ID card to various specialty stores to spend money. They bought a lot of gold, silver, diamond jewelry, branded clothes, watches, computers, cell phones, and a bunch of other things. They were all in a shopping mall, and then they took the receipts to pay. In the end, all the cards were used. Each of them had a chance to enter the PIN 3 times, but all of them were wrong. How could it be wrong? What's Auntie's birthday? Could she have used her mother's birthday as the PIN? Or her mother's death anniversary? Chapter 625. Most importantly, before they left, they told their mother about Jinwan's cards. They also told her that there were at least tens of millions of yuan in the black cards. Jinwan's aunt was extremely excited and had them go out to buy things first. She wanted to ask the neighbors where the best houses in G City were. They wanted to move to another house. With so much money, they could at least buy the biggest house in G City. If one wasn't enough, they could buy 2 more for Cece and Kiki, 1 for each of them near the university. In the end, the two sisters did not spend a single cent on these cards. Instead, they excitedly took a taxi to the city in the morning to buy things. They had already spent several hundred yuan on the taxi and food, and they had all taken out of their own wallets. The last black card ended up being locked due to the same password error 3 times. When Jinwan returned to her grandmother's home, Song Sisi and Song Kiki had just returned. Their hands were empty, and their expressions were extremely ugly. Her aunt did not know that the cards could not be swiped. She was sitting in the yard excitedly calling all sorts of relatives, saying that they were going to change houses. She also said that after Cece and Kiki got married, had children and raised children, they would have a large sum of money. She also wanted to buy a few houses near the university and open a shop to do business. She also wanted to invite relatives over for a meal. She had even thought of a hotel for the relatives. It would be the most expensive 5-star hotel in G City. Jinwan had just stepped out of the door when she heard her aunt's voice on the phone. Her excitement was clear on her face, as though the money was already in her hands. she suddenly saw Song Sisi and Song Kiki returning. She was about to ask them why they came back empty-handed, but before she could ask, she saw a black car parked outside. As soon as they saw the car, although they couldn't recognize the brand, they could tell it was definitely not cheap. The mother and daughter were all stunned, but then they saw Jinwan open the door and get out of the car. Seeing that Jinwan had actually returned, the two sisters were frightened and rushed to hide her wallet behind her back. When she alighted from the car, Jinwan wore a smile, but it did not reach her eyes. She walked into the yard and glanced at Song Sisi, who was trying hard to hide her hands behind her back. "How is it? You didn't even guess a single password correctly?" Jinwan asked with a smile. But although she seemed to be smiling, she suddenly directly exposed their behavior, which was almost equivalent to theft. The expressions on the faces of the two sisters could instantly be described as colorful. Her aunt was startled. Her earlier excitement seemed to have been doused with a pail of cold water by Jinwan's words. No wonder Sisi and Kiki had returned empty-handed. Did that mean the two of them hadn't spent a single cent with Jinwan's card? Earlier, she had invited over 10 relatives over for a meal, and even said that they were going to eat at the most expensive 5-star hotel. First aunt's face froze as well. "Give." Jinwan's words. She smiled. Nguan Tang. She had already made herself clear. Song Sisi's expression was livid. She held back her anger for a moment and suddenly took out her purse and threw it at Jinwan. However, Jinwan dodged it in time and caught the purse before it fell to the ground. Seeing Jinwan's nimble movements, Song Sisi, who had just swung the purse with brute force, was speechless. The two sisters' complexions were very poor, and the eldest aunt's expression was not much better. Seeing that Jinwan's complexion appeared somewhat haggard, she did not guess that she had been in the hospital for an entire morning because of a high fever. She only thought that she had gone out to fool around last night. She immediately reprimanded her. "Since you're so rich, what's wrong with giving some money to your two sisters to spend? You've been back for 2 or 3 days. What have you bought for home? Those small gifts and trinkets probably add up to less than 10,000 yuan. That card of yours has at least 10 million yuan in it. You're really stingy to give such a small gift to your family." Jinwan sneered. "Auntie, don't you think too highly of yourself? Don't you know why I came to G City? Even after my mother passed away, you didn't go to High City to visit her. Now that my grandmother is sick, I only came here to see her because of our blood ties. Based on our relationship, I'm already giving you face by coming back. The gifts and supplements I bought are also my sincerity. But I don't seem to owe you anything. Even when my grandmother was in the hospital 2 days ago, I kept a filial heart and stayed by her bedside to take care of her. Even if you want to nitpick, I'm afraid you won't be able to find out what I've done. How can you stand here and say that I'm stingy? Regardless of whether I'm rich or not, even a beggar on the street knows that if they want money, they have to bow down and thank me or show off their talent in singing and playing the eru. You're stretching out your hands, aren't you embarrassed?" Jinwan directly raised the wallet in her hand. Her eyes seemed to be filled with mockery. "Besides, not only did you stretch out your hands, you even dared to steal my wallet. It's only because you're related to my mother that I didn't bother to call the police. Otherwise, I could have detained you and your mother for theft at any time." "We didn't steal it." Song Kiki was frightened by Jinwan's sudden toughness and coldness. Yesterday, Jinwan clearly gave them some face on account of her mother and appeared to be tolerating it. But now she even dared to call the police. Song Kiki carefully said, "You didn't lock the door before you left. My sister and I went in to help you tidy up the house. When we saw your wallet on the floor, we took it out to take a look. Anyway, didn't you promise to leave us 200,000 yuan? We were in a hurry to buy things, so we took the wallet and left. Besides, even if we took it, we didn't spend it, right? We didn't spend it and it's all frozen." Jinwan suddenly smiled at Song Kiki. "Don't say that I didn't agree to that so-called 200,000 yuan. Even if I agreed, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to take it out." "Why? You're clearly so rich." Song Sisi was also anxious. She originally thought that they had at least 200,000 yuan to buy things. Jinwan raised the wallet again and waved it in front of her. She was full of smiles. "What? Because the cards have all been frozen." Song Sisi and Song Kiki's faces instantly paled. "How is that possible? You always have cash on you." Chapter 626. The two sisters' expressions faltered. They had indeed searched through Jinwan's wallet. Jinwan did not have much cash in it. As they had been thinking about the money in the card, they had not been interested in the 1 or 2,000 yuan worth of cash and had not touched it. But now Jin Wan was saying that she did not even have the 200,000 yuan? Song Sisi and Song Kiki immediately panicked. They turned to look at their mother. The more the aunt heard, the uglier her expression became. She abruptly shouted angrily, "Since you don't plan on giving us a single cent, why did you come back? My things are still here. If I don't come back to take them, am I supposed to leave them for you?" The moment her aunt heard that Jin Wan was really planning on leaving and did not plan on leaving them any face, she recalled the promises she had made to her relatives earlier and how her hopes of buying a house and various other things were about to be dashed. She held herself as Jin Wan's elder and raised her hand to give her a slap. However, the moment she raised her hand before she could swing it down, her wrist was abruptly held. Jin Wan calmly and indifferently looked at her. She shook her hand off, causing her aunt to stumble and take a step back. Just as she was about to scold her, she suddenly saw the door of the black car outside open once more. Two young men alighted from the car. The man who alighted from the driver's seat appeared to be very elegant. As for the man who opened the back door, he was dressed in a black suit with a black coat over it. From the moment he appeared, it was obvious that he was not an ordinary person. The moment Song Sisi and Song Kiki saw Mo Jingshan, their eyes widened. Shenmu followed behind Mo Jingshan. Jin Wan saw their expressions and immediately understood what was going on. She turned back to see that Mo Jingshan had already approached. For this man to appear in such a small place, his aura was very different from the surroundings. However, it caused Jin Wan's heart to feel more at ease. Compared to a few days ago when she was alone in her grandmother's chaotic home, she felt much more at ease. Although she did not wish to admit it. She felt especially at ease wherever Mo Jingshan was. "Miss Ji, what can I do for you?" When Shenmu was in the car earlier, he saw that this middle-aged woman seemed to want to hit someone. Thankfully, Jin Wan raised her hand to stop her and did not stand there to be beaten. Otherwise, Mo would most likely burn down this house in a fit of anger. Thus, when Shenmu spoke, he directly walked behind Jin Wan. He was concerned and respectful toward Jin Wan, but his gaze was cold as he looked at the mother and daughter. His expression clearly showed that they were not to be trifled with and warned them to restrain themselves. "Just help me take out the suitcase from that room." "Thank you, Shenmu." Jin Wan turned her eyes. Her earlier cold and domineering attitude toward the mother and daughter changed, and she smiled at Shenmu. Shenmu nodded and entered the room that he had personally pried open in the wee hours of the morning. "What else do you want to take?" Mo Jingshan had already walked to Jin Wan's side. His gaze did not even glance at the mother and daughter. His voice was cold and indifferent. If Shenmu was dissatisfied with their vile behavior earlier, Mo Jingshan's attitude toward them was indifference and disregard. His entire being exuded an unapproachable aura, causing them to not even dare to speak to him out of curiosity. "I don't think so." Jin Wan gently patted her purse against her palm. Initially she thought that they would search through her bag and suitcase. However, since they had already taken her purse, it was likely that they would place all their attention on the cards and would not touch anything else. Thus, there was nothing else for her to search. When Jin Wan alighted from the car, she was still dressed in the same clothes that she was wearing when she was lying on the hospital bed. It had just rained last night and the weather was slightly chilly. Mo Jingshan only glanced at her thin clothes before casually removing his coat and placing it on her. Jin Wan, on the other hand, stood motionless. She was well aware of how Mo Jingshan usually treated her in private. In any case, this man would never purposely display his affection in front of others. This was completely out of his instincts to show his concern for her. Suddenly, such a high-class car arrived. Even the driver appeared to be dressed expensively. The other man was even more eye-catching. Furthermore, from his actions of helping Jin Wan with her coat, Song Sisi and Song Kiki thought that they were watching an idol drama. They were both envious and secretly jealous. They did not know what relationship Jin Wan had with this extraordinarily handsome man. "Who are you?" Auntie asked directly, her eyes sizing up the man from head to toe. In the past, when she saw rich men on television wearing suits, they were mostly sponsored by brands. No matter how she looked at it, it was obvious that they were fake. However, the man before her clearly wore a very formal black suit, yet he wore it casually. There was not the slightest bit of effort, as though he had always been standing in this position. Everything was beneath his feet and no one could easily reach him. He clearly exuded a noble and cold aura that others could not help but look up to. Yet he was unbelievably gentle toward Jin Wan. It was very obvious that he was not someone from the same world as them. The difference between clouds and mud. At this moment, these 4 words finally had a completely understandable interpretation. Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear her words. He only said to Jinwan, "If you're cold, get in the car first. Have Shenmu bring out the things. If there's anything missing, have him look for it in the other rooms. It's all right. Compared to Jing City a few days ago, this place is much warmer." Jinwan's fever had just subsided, so she was slightly afraid of the cold. She was not as weak as Mo Jingshan imagined. However, this coat did indeed make her feel much warmer. "I'm asking you a question. Who are you? How dare you enter our courtyard? Can't you hear what I'm saying by standing here?" Her aunt saw that she was completely ignored and felt a little embarrassed. She could not help but raise her voice. However, aside from raising her voice, it was unable to suppress the man's indifferent and unapproachable aura. Mo Jingshan's gaze finally landed on the middle-aged woman. "As Jinwan's husband, is there a problem with me standing here?" Her aunt's expression immediately faltered. "It's husband." Jinwan's expression was also slightly dumbfounded. How could he have the cheek to say the word, husband? She did not have the time to investigate the divorce. He was clearly her ex-husband. She did not speak and only secretly glared at the man from the side. Her aunt's gaze scanned Mo Jingshan up and down several times. For a moment, she did not even dare to show her expression. 2 days ago, she had said that Jinwan might marry some terrible old man. Her mind buzzed and she felt as though her face had been slapped loudly. Furthermore, this man did not look like a small character. Regardless of whether it was his net worth or his background, he was most likely even more prominent than the Ji family. Chapter 627. Although her heart was filled with jealousy and disbelief, her aunt's lips trembled for a long time before she forced out a smile. In order to avoid offending someone she could not afford to offend, and since she was still thinking about buying a house and the money, she forced a smile and said, When did Jinwan get married?" "We didn't even know. Since we're a family, look at how Jinwan's card has been frozen. It's not convenient for her to take any money from home. Can you help her out?" Based on Jinwan's understanding of human nature, she had never imagined that a person could be this shameless. Even in a small city, the majority of the people were simple and honest. It was rare to see someone as thick-skinned as his aunt. Yet, Mo Jingshan only coldly glanced at her aunt. His lips curved slightly, but it was cold and indifferent. "Between husband and wife, isn't it normal for the wife to manage the money? My cards are all in Wan's hands. If there are no accidents, they should have been frozen today." The smile on her aunt's face immediately collapsed. She abruptly turned to look at Song Sisi and Song Kiki. These two sisters were first bewitched by Mo Jingshan, and in the end Mo Jingshan's words woke them up. Seeing her mother glare at them, Song Sisi furrowed her brows and asked awkwardly, "Rich people like you, how can you not leave a single card for yourself? Cousin's wallet indeed has quite a number of cards. We can't tell who each of them belongs to, but the two of you combined shouldn't only have so few cards." Mo Jingshan's gaze finally landed on Song Sisi's face. He coldly and indifferently glanced at her. "One card can be used for many purposes. How many more do you need?" Song Sisi choked. Indeed, any black card was worth at least 10 million yuan. If it was a limitless black card, then there was no need to keep other cards in her wallet. It seemed like these rich people did not need to use credit cards to get loans, nor did they need to keep other useless cards in their hands. One card was enough. Besides, the cards in Jinwan's wallet were already quite a lot. But Song Sisi was still unwilling. She was even more unwilling that Jinwan was actually married, and that her husband was someone who seemed to have walked out of a television show. Many male models and good-looking celebrities could not compare to his face. Furthermore, his figure was so tall and perfect. This was enough to make the two sisters' hearts sour. If they did not receive any money now, they would most likely be so angry that they would not be able to sleep well for several days. However, Mo Jingshan directly cut off her words. "You claim to be her family, but you didn't even know that she had a high fever last night. It was rare for Wan to go out on her own. I was worried, so I drove through the night to accompany her. In the end, the moment I arrived, I saw my sweetheart lying unconscious on the bed with a high fever. On the ground was a bucket of instant noodles that she braved the rain to buy. Clearly, you didn't even leave her any dinner. When has she ever suffered such grievances? Seeing that your family, I tolerated it for a few days, but it seems like you don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you really think that her temper is so soft that you can bully her as you please?" The man's voice sounded mild and calm, but it was so cold that it was as though ice was about to fall. It caused one to shiver. Although Jinwan did not feel like she was about to fall, she felt goosebumps all over. "Sweetheart? What the hell?" No, it's not like that. Last night, she was the one who said she wasn't hungry. From her aunt's reply, it was clear that she did not care about Jinwan's life or death. She had clearly heard that Jinwan had fainted with a high fever last night, but when she opened her mouth, it was not to ask about her fever. Instead, it was to explain that she did not leave any food for her. Jinwan's lips curved coldly. In her heart, she was still rejoicing. Rejoicing that her mother had left this place. If your daughter doesn't have an appetite at night and doesn't eat, do you prepare some dinner for her and place it in the fridge to heat it up when she's hungry in the middle of the night? Mo Jingshan looked at his aunt. His dark eyes were filled with coldness and displeasure. The scene of Jinwan pitifully curled up in the blanket in the wee hours of the morning was still fresh in his mind. Thinking of that scene, the man's gaze became even colder from the autumn rain, devoid of any warmth. His aunt's lips moved, but she could not say anything for a long time. Usually when Wan is by my side, she has never suffered such grievances. It's rare for her to return to her grandmother's home and experience everything. For her to be able to stand here patiently, she can already be considered to have a good temper. If it was me, if anyone dared to mess around in front of her, I'm afraid that person would have to pay a certain price. Right now Wan is only here to retrieve her things. If I didn't see wrongly, you raised your hand to hit her, didn't you? The man's cold and deep voice was by her side. Jinwan glanced sideways at Mo Jingshan's cold and indifferent face. This man usually did not speak much. Right now, it was rare for him to speak a few more words, but every single one of them was for her. She pursed her lips. His aunt originally wanted to raise her voice to regain some face. However, when she raised her head and met the man's cold and indifferent gaze, the heavy sense of danger caused her to shiver uncontrollably. It was as though if she dared to say another word that would make Jinwan unhappy, his earlier promise of making them pay would immediately become reality. Earlier, it was a misunderstanding. His aunt retracted her gaze and did not dare to meet Mo Jingshan's eyes. She felt that this man was definitely not someone to be trifled with. If these poor and desolate people really offended him, it was likely that they would be squashed to death like ants. His aunt stealthily reached out and pinched Song Sisi and Song Kik's waists harshly. The two sisters' eyes instantly reddened. They cooperated by the side and softly said, choking with sobs, Right. It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Cousin, please don't hold it against us. It's all a misunderstanding. Seeing the mother and daughter trio's appearance, Jinwan's eyes turned cold for a moment. All these years, she was used to being domineering in the business world. She was also used to putting on a tough attitude when facing the evil in the business world. This time, she had returned to her grandmother's home with the intention of visiting relatives. She had also considered her mother's relationship with them and did not treat them too harshly. She had tolerated them for 2 days in a tolerant manner, but in the end they had almost stepped on her head. As expected, when dealing with people like them, being too tolerant and caring for family was useless. She might as well let them see her bottom line from the start. If she made a wrong move, it would be easy for them to take advantage of this loophole. Chapter 628. Her gaze then landed on the clothes Song Kiki and Song Sisi were wearing. Those were the clothes she had snatched from her. These two sisters really had a soft spot for her clothes. According to the way they wore them, coupled with her aunt's incessant washing, these clothes would most likely be ruined in a few days. Jinwan did not say anything more. The mockery in her eyes was obvious. She glanced at them a few times before shifting her gaze away. She then saw that Shinmu had already packed her luggage and was carrying it out. Shinmu carried the luggage out and approached Jinwan's side. He then respectfully and politely asked, Miss Ji, everything I can see in your room including your luggage. Is there anything else you want to take with you? Right now, Jinwan did not wish to leave anything for them. However, the only thing she had were the small gifts she had bought from the airport and a few sets of clothes. Since the clothes had already been worn, there was no way she would wear them again. Furthermore, based on the way they wore them, they would most likely be thrown away in less than 2 months. Thinking about it, she did not seem to have left anything else behind. Jinwan turned toward her mother's room. There shouldn't be anything else. I'll go in and take a look. All right. Shinmu directly picked up the luggage and turned to leave. He opened the trunk of the car and placed the luggage inside. Seeing Jinwan return to her mother's room, Song Sisi and Song Kik's gazes landed on Mo Jingshan once more. Both of them were in their 20s. Even though they knew he was Jinwan's husband, they could not help but take a few more glances at him. Song Sisi even raised her hand to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. She blushed as she said, That? Cousin-in-law, Since you're already here, don't be in a hurry to leave. You should also persuade cousin to not be angry with us. We're all relatives. In the future, if we sisters want to work in a big city after graduation, we'll have to ask cousin to help us. We'll all visit each other often in the future. There's no need to be too. Song Sisi had yet to finish her words when the man before her turned around and walked toward the direction Jinwan had gone. It was as though he did not hear her words at all. Being ignored like that, Song Sisi immediately felt a little awkward. However, she couldn't help but sneak a peek behind her. All she could see was the tall and slender back of the man. She had never seen such a handsome man before. Not to mention Song Sisi, even Song Kik's eyes were glued to him. Due to her shyness, she tugged at her sleeves tightly, biting her lips as she glanced at him from time to time. However, from start to finish, the two sisters did not receive a single glance from him. He did not even give them a cold glance. After entering, Jinwan checked to see if there was anything left, including some charging cables and so on. Then she went to the drawers and cabinets to see if her mother's belongings had been taken away. After making sure they were all gone, she turned around and was about to go out. Just as she was about to leave, she saw Mo Jingshan enter. Thinking of what the man had just said outside, Jinwan glanced at him and was about to leave. However, the moment she brushed past him, the man held her wrist. "Have you checked everything? Is there nothing left?" "And nothing else. You can leave now." Jinwan's voice sounded calm, but also a little gloomy. Mo Jingshan glanced at her from the side. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking." Jinwan turned to glare at him. How did the great Mo manage to say something like, "precious darling"? The man's eyelids twitched slightly. His cold and mild face carried a hint of a smile. What precious darling? He was clearly the one who had said it earlier. Jinwan ignored him and was about to leave. However, the man abruptly pulled her into his embrace with the strength of his grip. At the same time, he easily turned around and took 2 steps forward, pressing her against the wall by the open door. "What are you doing? If the people outside approach, they'll be able to see." From her angle, Jinwan could see Song Sisi and Song Kiki peering in from the corner of her eyes. However, they did not dare to approach, so they could only see their actions from this angle. However, they could not clearly see what was going on inside the door. "Which part of me doesn't seem like I'm holding you in my hands like a precious darling?" Are these words very strange? As Mo Jingshan spoke, he moved even closer to Jinwan. The distance between them immediately closed. It was as though the man only needed to bend down by 2 centimeters in the next moment to directly kiss her on the lips. Jinwan subconsciously stepped back, and the back of her head knocked against the wall. Mo Jingshan supported himself with one hand, turning his head to kiss Jinwan's lips. His sudden movement caused Jinwan's heart to flutter. Her body reacted faster than her brain. When their lips were about to touch, she rushed to the side to avoid it. The man's kiss landed on her cheek, but he did not stop. He only curved his lips into a smile and kissed her cheek again. Following her movement, he kissed her ear. "Mo Jingshan, what kind of place is this? Don't mess around." The man gripped her hand against his chest. When Jinwan turned to reprimand him, he accurately captured her lips. As Jinwan trembled against the wall, he directly kissed her. Song Sisi and Song Kiki were worried that Jinwan would bring the rest of the things in the house with her. It would be fine if she only took the things in her suitcase, but they were also afraid that Jinwan would take the good things in the house with her. The two waited for a long time, but they did not see them come out. Thus, they tacitly exchanged glances and took a few steps in that direction. However, after taking 4 or 5 steps, they could clearly see the scene that caused one's heart to pound and make one's face blush. Due to this place and the environment, Jinwan was extremely nervous. Her hand remained pressed against the man's chest. Although she was clearly pushing him away in the eyes of others, it appeared as though she was trying to reject him. The tall man pressed Jinwan against the wall. He supported himself with one hand against the wall behind her while the other held her waist gently. His kiss was deep and tender. The instant Song Sisi and Song Kiki saw this scene, their footsteps froze. They could not help but swallow their saliva. Their eyes were filled with envy, and they did not know if they should continue approaching or move further away. Just as the two sisters stood there awkwardly and enviously, Jinwan finally pushed the man away. However, she only managed to push him away by an arm's length. At the same time, she sensitively sensed the gazes from outside. The moment she saw the two sisters, she angrily slapped Mo Jingshan's arm. Chapter 629. Jinwan watched the man's smiling face. "You've actually learned how to show off your love in front of others?" Are you Mo Jingshan or not? You actually know how to use such a senseless method. The man lightly curved his lips, revealing a patient and gentle smile that could only be seen in front of her. I don't like to see you being bullied. As a prop that came to your door, aside from showing off my love, I can only destroy this family's foundation in one night. But after all, I was your mother's relative when she was alive. Do you want me to use the most gentle method or the cruelest method to take revenge for you, N? He really switched between gentleness and cruelty so easily. However, if it wasn't because of her mother, Mo Jingshan most likely wouldn't just sit and wait for death. He definitely wouldn't let it go so easily. Jinwan knew that his words made sense and it was for her own good. After thinking for a moment, she put on a straight face and slapped his arm as though venting her anger. However, in return, the man smiled indulgently, as though he really liked seeing her acting so awkward and about to explode. Finally, when Jinwan pushed him again, Mo Jingshan released his hand. However, he directly held her hand and led her out. The two sisters watched as this unbelievably handsome man held Jinwan's hand and appeared to be very affectionate with her. They stood in the yard silently, but their hearts were filled with all sorts of emotions. Jealousy, unwillingness, and a sense of inferiority surged up. They no longer felt the dark satisfaction they had when they tried to extort Jinwan's money 2 days ago, nor did they feel the satisfaction of being able to bully the young miss of a wealthy family. They only felt as though everything had been bounced back, and their eyes turned red from the sourness. Seeing that they were really leaving, Jinwan's aunt rushed over, speaking fawningly, Jinwan, didn't you say you had a fever last night? If you're not feeling well, don't be in such a hurry to leave. It's too tiring to travel all the way here. Why don't you stay at home for a few more days? Jinwan's fever had indeed subsided not too long ago, but she did not wish to continue staying here. Do you want to stay? Mo Jingshan's long, slender fingers held Jinwan's hand in his palm. Jinwan found that once Mo Jingshan decided to act, his acting skills were really good. Even his every action and tone was like a good husband who was being controlled by his wife. Not only was his money and cards in her hands, but even the way he spoke and the way he cared for her were especially gentle and patient. Even his usual words were changed, perfectly portraying the image of a good husband who only cared about his wife. She said, No, but Grandma's health is not very good. On the day I accompanied her in the hospital, I found that the medicine she usually takes is cheap fake medicine. She doesn't have enough nutrition. Before we leave, we will buy more medicine and food. After we send them to Grandma, we will leave directly. Hearing Jinwan's words, her aunt's expression immediately changed. She did not dare to speak and directly retreated to the side, not responding. Of course, she knew what was going on with those cheap fake medicines. She was the one who bought them. After all, the old lady was already so old. Since many years ago, she could not do anything and could only eat and drink for free. This time, after being hospitalized for a cerebral hemorrhage, she was directly paralyzed and could not take care of herself. Not only did it cost money, but it also required people to take care of her. She also had to buy all sorts of expensive medicines to maintain her life. Those medicines were not cheap, so she simply contacted someone to buy some medicine bottles from the black market. She casually filled them with medicine that could reduce internal heat. After all, they wouldn't go bad, nor would they be poisonous. She did not expect to be discovered by Jinwan. Jinwan did not expect her aunt to feel any guilt. For a woman in her 50s like her who would only shout herself hoarse for small benefits, some deep-rooted bad habits would last a lifetime. But sooner or later she would have her own retribution. It was just that the time had not come. In the past, Jinwan only needed to hug her and return home from the company on time to cook a meal for her. That was enough to make her obedient. But right now it was not so easy for Jinwan to openly gain her favor. Even for someone like Mo Jingshan, who had always planned everything, he rarely admitted that it was difficult. G-City was not large. Shinmu drove them to buy things. After driving for about 40 minutes, they arrived at a relatively large pharmacy. Jinwan directly went in to buy medicine. Although her grandmother was not a good person and was clearly biased between her mother and her aunt, even if they could no longer contact each other in the future, she still had to buy these medicines. As for the rest, Jinwan did not plan to care. From buying medicine to buying all sorts of nutrition that the elderly needed, Jinwan finally stopped after filling the entire trunk. In the morning and afternoon, they only ate the food that Shinmu bought from outside. Furthermore, they didn't eat much. By the time they finished shopping, it was already 4:30 p.m. Shinmu parked the car in the parking lot near a shopping mall in G-City. He told them to eat first before going back. Anyway, he was only going to deliver some things. He didn't want his family to have dinner with him and asked them to stay. In fact, even if her aunt really wanted to use dinner as an excuse to make them stay, Jinwan would definitely not stay a minute longer in that home with Mo Jingshan. However, since they had already parked near the shopping mall, Jinwan glanced at the restaurants outside. None of them were big, so she chose the one that looked the cleanest. When she alighted from the car with Mo Jingshan, the two walked side by side. As they walked, Jinwan looked at the surroundings and said, "I really didn't expect that one day Great Boss Missouri would appear in a small city like this. You even have to find a place to eat near a wholesale mall." Mo Jingshan, how do I not look like an ordinary person? Do I have to specially find a gold-plated place to eat? That's not necessarily the case. But it's true that you don't fit in here. In fact, Jinwan did not want to laugh. However, when she saw the ordinary surroundings and the muddy weather, the air was filled with the stench of rotting vegetables from the nearby market, and the suit that Mo Jingshan was wearing, she felt that he must have rushed from Jing City to High City and then from High City to G City. He had been taking care of her and had not changed his clothes for at least 2 days. Although he was still incomparably handsome, it was rare that he did not look as noble and even more down-to-earth. When she spoke, she could not help but laugh. Seeing the woman glance at him, Mo Jingshan's handsome face remained expressionless. He reached over and held the woman in his arms, pressing her head against his chest, forcing her to press against the material of his shirt. He lowered his head and deliberately lowered his voice to say, "I haven't bathed for 2 days. You're very disgusted, eh?" "I don't dare to. I've stayed here for 3 days and haven't bathed. At most I've wiped myself. Last night I was drenched in the rain and until now I haven't even touched water. If we're going to be dirty, let's be dirty together. There's no need to be disgusted with each other." Jinwan wanted to push the man away, but unexpectedly, he held her tighter. Chapter 630. I heard that although G City is small, it's close to mountains and rivers. A small city with mountains and rivers has its own benefits. There are quite a number of hot spring hotels. Although the decorations can't be compared to Jing City, it's more natural. The man's low chuckle was by her ears. Jinwan could even feel Mo Jingshan's hand gently rubbing against her back. From an outsider's perspective, the two of them were only whispering intimately. However, Jinwan could clearly feel the man's obvious hints. They had already left Jing City, yet he was still thinking about the hot spring hotel. It was not just a hint. Jinwan could clearly feel that the man could tell that her temper had softened today and was no longer going against him. He was taking the opportunity to tease her. She glared at him. However, even though the man was teasing her, as long as her gaze met his, she could see that his calm and deep eyes were filled with her reflection. It was as though all of the jokes and teasing had become incomparably harmonious in an instant. There was not the slightest bit of absurdity. She rolled her eyes at him and directly entered a restaurant in front. Seeing that this woman was unmoved by force or persuasion, Mo Jingshan sighed with a smile. It was just a simple little restaurant, but it was clean and there were quite a few people. After eating, the two of them were in no rush to return. After all, the weather was gloomy and there would be a storm soon. If they were to leave now, they would encounter a storm on the way back. It was better to wait for the storm to pass and ensure that there were no puddles on the road before leaving. After eating, the sky was still overcast. Seeing that it would rain soon, Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at the sky and softly said, "Should we go back now or wait for the rain to pass?" Jinwan sat in the restaurant and looked at the weather outside. After thinking for a moment, she lazily said, "Let's go after the rain. The rain won't be light. However, there doesn't seem to be much to look at in G City. We don't know how long the rain will last. There aren't any attractions nearby. Why don't we find a cafe nearby to drink coffee to kill time?" Drink less coffee. Jinwan, these few years she had indeed drank a lot of coffee. However, Mo Jingshan clearly drank quite a lot as well. When she did not need to stay up late to work, she was indeed not addicted to coffee. However, she could not sit with Mo Jingshan in a crowded restaurant and face a few empty plates for the entire afternoon. "There's a shopping mall here. I'll accompany you." Jinwan, it was not easy for a man to take the initiative to accompany a woman to go shopping. It was obvious that this man wanted to please her. He probably couldn't think of anything more romantic in such a small place. Even the method was so practical. Jinwan was also a woman. Although she liked to buy things, she was not particularly keen on shopping, but at this moment she suddenly wanted to go shopping. Jinwan glanced at him. "My card is frozen. You know it?" Seeing that she was giving him a way out, the man took out his wallet and put it in front of her. Don't you have mine? Jean Wan glanced at the black, high-quality leather wallet on the table. After a moment of silence, she said, "My fever only subsided this morning. I can't carry anything. Buy whatever you want, I'll carry the bags." Jean Wan raised her brows, picked up the man's wallet, and directly put it into her bag. She stood up. "Oh, then I'll go shopping." His tone seemed to be very reluctant. Hearing this woman's deliberate tone, Mo Jingshan took another look at her. Jean Wan's expression was calm. She turned and walked directly toward the shopping mall. The man looked at her and smiled slightly. Far away from High City and Jing City, where there were too many businesses in this small town, he had the rare time and patience to win his wife back. Jean Wan took the man's wallet and walked directly into the shopping mall. She was wearing a pair of sports shoes that she had just changed into in the car. Her steps were light and fast, and her long hair was spread out behind her. As she walked, it danced with her movements. Coupled with her casual and comfortable clothes, she still looked like a young lady who was not even 20 years old. She was young and energetic, but not as flamboyant as she was many years ago. Under the faint restraint was a temperament that had been honed by life experience. The first floor of the shopping mall was mostly filled with cosmetics, jewelry, and watches. There were two shopping malls here. One was G City's wholesale mall, and there were all sorts of things. After entering, most of them were small trinkets that cost several tens of yuan. Even the clothes were not more than 100 yuan, but there were many different styles and there were many people inside. Next to it was G City's department store. There were not many people, but the quality of the items here was much higher, and there were also some branded items. Jean Wan, on the other hand, did not look down on any of them. After walking one round in the wholesale mall, she strolled around and looked at all kinds of trinkets. She touched this and that and she liked them very much. After shopping for more than an hour, she finally went to the other department store. Mo Jingshan was probably too good-looking and had attracted the attention of someone in the mall. They tugged at him and asked if he wanted to find a job and if he wanted to be a male model. They said that if he wore branded men's clothing and stood on the first floor for a day, he could earn 300 yuan a day. Jean Wan heard the movements behind her and quickly walked forward with a smile. She did not turn back. On the other hand, before the staff could finish their words, they were frozen by the man's cold and noble aura and did not dare to continue. However, they still muttered softly, 300 yuan a day. That's 9,000 yuan a month. You don't even care about such a high salary? Young people these days really don't care about money? However, the man did not even glance at the staff's work pass. He expressionlessly walked past. Jean Wan had already walked to the side of a jewelry store and was trying on a cute little ring. This was a silver jewelry store. The items were not expensive, but the craftsmanship and design were all exquisite. The price was roughly a few hundred yuan. Mo Jingshan did not look at the price. He only saw Jean Wan wearing the ring on her pinky finger. Does it look good? When Mo Jingshan walked over, Jean Wan raised her hand and waved it at him. Jean Wan's hand was very beautiful and suitable for wearing rings. However, she rarely wore jewelry on her body. The man glanced at it and only noticed one problem. Why is it on your pinky finger? Chapter 631. Jean Wan, what the hell was this? She just wanted to try it on. She didn't say she wanted to buy it. Besides, even if she wanted to wear it on other fingers, it wouldn't fit. Jean Wan was about to speak, but Mo Jingshan's hand had already firmly grasped hers. He took the ring off her little finger, gave her a very unkind look, and threw the ring back to the clerk behind the counter. Seeing the man's expression, Jean Wan pursed her lips. I didn't. Do you have other sizes? The man did not wait for her to speak and turned to ask the shop assistant. Yes. The shop assistant rushed to bring out several similar rings and placed them on the counter one by one. The man picked up a ring that was exactly the same as the one Jean Wan had just chosen and was about to put it on her ring finger. However, Jean Wan quickly withdrew her ring finger and glared at the man resolutely, indicating that she would not allow him to put it on her ring finger so casually. Mo Jingshan paused because of her obvious refusal. However, after thinking about it, although he was not sure about other fingers, the ring on her ring finger could not be worn so carelessly. He had to change it to a better occasion and ring. Thus he did not insist. After checking the size, he was about to put it on her index finger when the shop assistant spoke up again with a half-joking tone. Sir, you can't put it on your index finger either. Wearing a ring on your index finger implies that you are still single. If there are other men who want to pursue you, they can boldly pursue you. This is tantamount to announcing that you are single and welcoming others to pursue you. Are you trying to make yourself a cuckold? Mo Jingshan, Jinwan tried hard to hold back her laughter, but the faintly twitching flesh on her cheeks showed how hard it was for her to hold back her laughter. The shop assistant also noticed Jinwan's action of withdrawing her ring finger and said considerately, "If you are passionately in love, you can wear it on your middle finger. This means that the flower is taken and you are passionately in love." Jinwan wanted to say who was passionately in love with him. It sounded like there was no problem for her to wear it on her little finger. It was quite good. Anyway, she did not have any plans to fall in love. However, this time the man did not stop. He expressionlessly picked up another ring of the same size and put it on Jinwan's middle finger. Jinwan looked at the ring on her middle finger. It was quite pretty. In fact, although silver jewelry was not expensive, the craftsmanship was relatively simple, so it was relatively easy to make all kinds of complicated designs. This was a style that many other jewelry such as diamond, or platinum could not make. But she really didn't say that she wanted to buy it. Not bad. After helping her put it on, Mo Jingshan held Jinwan's soft little hand in his, not intending to let go. At the same time he appeared to be very satisfied. He said mildly, "It's very beautiful. Do you like it?" "Jinwan, I didn't plan to buy it. I just tried it on." The man acted as if he didn't hear her and turned to the shop assistant. "Do you have any other similar sizes?" "Yes." The shop assistant took out a few more items. They were all listed in front of Jinwan and she was dazzled. She felt that all of them were beautiful, but for some reason she felt that the one she was wearing was the most beautiful. In fact, they were all similar and the design style was outstanding. "You don't like it?" The man glanced at the ring on Jinwan's finger. "I like it, but there's no need. I'll take them all." "I said there's no need to buy it." "I didn't say." The man swept a glance and replied, "I think you don't know which one to choose. Why don't you buy them all and wear them every day?" Jinwan, shop assistant. Several minutes later, the shop assistant handed over a bill. "Sir, the 6 rings you've chosen cost a total of 1,590 yuan. Mo Jingshan's gaze faltered before landing on Jinwan's face. Jinwan once again held back her laughter. She suddenly realized that it was rare to see Boss Missouri in such a distressed state. A man like him might understand everything, but when it came to women's jewelry, he most likely didn't notice that this was a silver jewelry or other jewelry counter. He should have been prepared to spend millions or even tens of millions. Jinwan raised her hand, waving the rings in front of his eyes. She smiled and said, "This is a silver ring. Each one is only 200 to 300 yuan. When the man heard the price, he no longer showed any signs of surprise. He glanced at her again. "Are you sure you like it?" Jinwan nodded. Since it wasn't expensive, she could just buy it. The blue diamond that was worth who knew how many billions was still in her hands, and the painting that was worth 600 million was gifted to her just like that. It was rare for her to go shopping, so there was nothing wrong with buying some small trinkets. Seeing that she really liked it, the man held her hand and turned to pay. In a small place like this, he could not casually wave his hand and put it under Boss Mo's name. Instead, he had to go to the cashier to pay in cash or by card. While the shop assistant waited by the counter, she carefully wrapped the rings and placed them into a jewelry bag. At the side, one of the shop assistants muttered softly, "They actually bought so many silver rings. They're really simple and unadorned." The shop assistant who had just sold the rings calmly said, "Don't be so superficial. Just look at that man and young lady's attire. Just a single cufflink from that man's suit would be enough to buy our entire shop. Don't rich people nowadays always say to return to their roots? Maybe it's because there are too many luxurious things, so he's interested in these little crafts on the street. Also, that young lady looks really good wearing it. She's prettier than many of the big diamond rings I've seen." "That's true. That man doesn't look like an ordinary person. That young lady doesn't look ordinary either. Furthermore, that man kept asking that young lady if she really liked it. It was because she liked it that he bought it. Why would he care about the price? As long as the person he loves likes it, even jewelry worth hundreds of millions can't compare to a silver ring like this." After shopping for an hour in the department store, Jinwan could no longer stand Mo Jingshan's attitude of helping her pack whatever she liked. In the end, she dragged him to the fresh supermarket on the basement level. Originally, Jinwan was tugging on Mo Jingshan's sleeve as they walked. However, when they got off the elevator, Jinwan suddenly realized that when did he become the one holding her hand? In a public place, Mo Jingshan, who had always been low-key and reserved, actually had a time when he was so persistent about certain things. For example, holding her hand. From the moment she tried on the ring, he naturally held her hand. Now he naturally held her hand. He really acted as if it was only right and proper. Chapter 632. Not only did he hold her hand the entire time they stepped out of the elevator, he did not even intend to let go when Jinwan went to pick some fruits. "Mo Jingshan, I want to pick some fruits." Jinwan turned to look at him, her tone filled with impatience. The man lowered his head to look at her hand in his. His tone was calm as he said, "Which ones do you want? I'll help you pick. I can pick them myself. After buying a few more things we can go back. I think the rain outside should have stopped by now. Let go of my hand. I'll do it myself." She tried to pull her hand away several times, but the man did not give her the chance. The uncles and aunties selling fruits all looked at them with ambiguous and envious gazes. In the end, Jinwan was helpless. She picked some fruits with one hand and handed them to the man to carry. Thankfully, Shinmu came in time to help Mo Jingshan carry the rest to the car. Otherwise, no matter how strong Mo Jingshan was, it would not be realistic for him to carry so many things with one hand. Just like that, they were forced to hold hands and buy all sorts of things. As the two walked back to the elevator, Jinwan said, "Don't tell me you plan to hold my hand forever? How long do you think you can hold it for? A lifetime?" Mo Jingshan, N. Jinwan, shameless. Who would want to hold his hand forever? Don't think that just because he carried her out of her grandmother's house and sent her to the hospital in time to take care of her, she didn't fall out with him just because she was grateful to him. She really went with the flow and became his Mrs. Mo. Impossible. Anyway, it was impossible. Absolutely impossible. Jinwan wanted to say this. However, when she tried to pull her hand away again in the elevator, the man held her firmly in his hand and did not let go. At the same time, his other hand held the fruits, vegetables and fresh fish they bought with her. For some reason, she felt that the down-to-earth and homey boss Missouri was truly a breath of fresh air in the world of presidents. By the time they drove back to her grandmother's house, the storm had stopped. It had been raining for more than an hour. There was a small puddle on the ground, but it was not serious. Jinwan checked the weather forecast in the car and confirmed that there would not be any more rain today. After sending these things back to her grandmother, they could leave. When they returned to her grandmother's home, Shinmu helped carry the things in one by one. Mo Jingshan also carried a few things. However, although Jinwan dared to order Mo Jingshan around, Shinmu did not dare. Seeing his boss carrying the things so diligently without any complaints, he was so frightened that he rushed out and took the things in his hands, saying, "See him arrest. I'll do it, I'll do it." Her aunt sat in the yard, holding a fly swatter in one hand. She subconsciously swatted it back and forth on a wooden table. She watched as Jinwan and the others brought back all sorts of food, drinks and medicine. It could be seen that they must have spent quite a lot on this trip. If they really didn't have a card to swipe, they wouldn't have bought so many things. But every time she wanted to ask for money, she raised her eyes to see the man called Mo, the man who claimed to be Jinwan's husband. She hesitated and did not dare to speak up in the end. After Shinmu helped to carry everything in, Jinwan did not plan to stay here anymore. She planned to go in and bid farewell to her grandmother, who was lying on the bed, before leaving. Her grandmother looked at the piles of medicine and food by the bedside. She heard from the young man surnamed Shin that these were all bought by Jinwan. She also heard that Jinwan was going to leave. Her old face was thoughtful when she suddenly heard footsteps. She turned to see Jinwan walking in. "Grandmother, take good care of your body. If you eat these nourishing foods daily, they'll be enough for you for a year. They have a long shelf life, so you can eat them without worry. As for the medicine, they have a shelf life of 2 to 3 years. I bought a lot of them. It shouldn't be a problem for you to take them for 2 to 3 years." Jinwan stood by the bed and did not sit down. Her gaze was calm and indifferent. "I'll take all the things my mother left here with me. I won't have the chance to come back to G City in the future. Take care of yourself." After speaking, she did not look at her grandmother's expression and turned to leave. "Wait a minute, Jinwan." Her grandmother's gaze was stiff as she looked at the pile of things on the floor. Just as Jinwan was about to leave, she suddenly called out to her. "Child, wait a minute. I have something to tell you." Jinwan paused in her footsteps and turned back to look at her. Her grandmother's words were a little rushed. She coughed twice before leaning against the bed. She said weakly, "I won't be able to live for much longer. My body will live as long as I can. I originally wanted to call you back to tell you about your mother, but after seeing you return, I didn't know what to say. I know you don't have any feelings for your grandmother, but you do have a filial heart." Jinwan calmly looked at her. In fact, from the start, she had thought that she might be able to find out something by coming to G City. However, in the few days she had been back, apart from witnessing the weirdness of this family, she had gained nothing. But looking at her grandmother's expression, it seemed like she was finally going to get to the main topic. Jin Wan sat in her grandmother's room for around 40 minutes and did not come out. Shenmu was slightly worried. He sat in the car and said, "Miss Ji only went in to say goodbye. Why hasn't she come out yet?" Mo Jingshan's gaze calmly shifted to the mother and daughter trio in the yard. This meant that Jin Wan was in her grandmother's room. There was only Jin Wan and the old woman who was paralyzed on the bed without anyone's help. It was clear that they were only chatting inside. Nothing else would happen. "There's no rush. Wait patiently." The moment Mo Jingshan's words landed, Shenmu turned to look at the two sisters, Song Cici and Song Kiki. Because they saw that Mo Jingshan did not plan to sit in their home and was waiting in the car outside the yard, the two sisters seemed to be thinking of something. They went in to change their clothes, put on makeup and did their hair. They then stood in the yard chatting and laughing, as though they were afraid that no one would be able to tell that they were purposely putting on a show for Mo. However, the two sisters were hindered by Mo Jingshan's aura. Even if they wanted to, they did not have the guts to approach him. They could only stand in the yard and attempt to seduce him from afar. Their gazes would occasionally shift toward the car window. However, from the angle of the car window, they could not clearly see where Mo Jingshan was sitting in the car. Thus, their gazes kept shifting back and forth in the direction of the car windows. Yet Mo Jingshan did not even glance at them. It was as though the yard was filled with filthy things. He could not even be bothered to lift his eyelids in that direction. Chapter 633. When Jin Wan left her grandmother's room, Song Cici and Song Kiki were already tired from twisting and were resting in the courtyard. They turned to see Jin Wan walking out. The two sisters raised their eyes to look at her, but Jin Wan walked out without looking. Her face was expressionless, and it was impossible to tell what she was feeling. After Jin Wan boarded the car and the high-end black car drove away, the mother and daughter trio sat in the courtyard with dejected expressions because they did not receive a single cent. Jin Wan sat quietly in the car. She kept her eyes out of the window and did not speak. Mo Jingshan saw that she was troubled and did not speak. He gave her time to sort out her emotions. It was not until the car drove toward the main road of G City and moved further away from her so-called grandmother's house that the man's hand landed on the hand she had placed by her leg. He spoke, "You only came out after almost an hour. What did you talk about?" Jin Wan paused and continued to look out the window. "She only spoke, she told me some things about my mother. I haven't figured out my own identity yet, but she threw me a difficult problem." "What problem?" "She said that my mother was not her biological mother. She said that when she was young she worked for a rich family in Jing City and worked as a servant for a year. Later she returned to the countryside and gave birth to my aunt. Because she lacked money she went back to work for that family again. However, something happened to that family. It was similar to the melodramatic stories that only the older generation would have. Anyway, not long after my mother was born she became an abandoned baby. My grandmother picked my mother up and raised her until she was 10 years old. When she sent her back, she wanted to take the opportunity to ask for some money. However, that family had already moved abroad and couldn't be contacted. At this point, Jin Wan raised her hand to push back the hair hanging over her forehead and said mildly, "She adopted my mother so that she could ask for a few million yuan from that family when they wanted to find the child. However, her hopes were dashed. After that, she no longer had any thoughts about my mother and left her to fend for herself. After my mother graduated from junior high school, she borrowed money from her relatives for her high school education. Later she worked to earn money and applied for a student loan. In the end she received a scholarship to study abroad. Most of the money she earned was returned to those relatives. After that she basically had no contact with my grandmother's family. However, after so many years until my mother passed away, she still didn't know what happened to her own identity. She only thought that my grandmother didn't like her. Decades ago, there were indeed many wealthy families in China who preferred boys over girls. In China, especially in Jing City in that era, those who could be called rich were not ordinary and abandoned baby girls were common. I can't tell what I'm feeling right now. On the one hand, I'm glad that my mother is not related to this family by blood because I really hate their faces. On the other hand, I'm sorry that she didn't know her own identity until she died. Perhaps after so long we can't find the root cause. But my mother, such a beautiful, strong and hard-working woman, died of emotional entanglements and physical reasons. At this time I finally understand why Ji Hongwen was so kind to my mother. Even though she was pregnant with someone else's child, he was willing to marry her and protect her. But I can't imagine if I really have any relationship with the Xiao family. Under what circumstances did Chairman Xiao, who was married and had children, make my mother pregnant with me? But in the end, he didn't take responsibility and let her marry into the Ji family with the child. I remember that at Chairman Zhao's birthday party on that cruise ship, when Xiao Li was going to take me to see his father, you said that I wouldn't be happy to see them. Jin Wan turned to look at Mo Jingshan, who had been listening to her without saying a word. Have you investigated my identity? Do you know that even if I'm really Chairman Zhao's daughter, I may not be willing to acknowledge him? Mo Jingshan gently held her hand in his, saying mildly, from the high fever and coma in the morning to the hospital, to the shopping in the afternoon, until now, your endurance has been greatly reduced. I only heard a lot of things, so I'm not specific. It's just the emotional entanglements between the previous generation. It's not that complicated. You're tired. Take a rest first. We'll talk about it later, okay? Jin Wan turned to look at him and thought for a while. He was right. Since Ji Hongwen asked her to go back to Ji City first, he had planned to tell her everything bit by bit. There was no need for her to ask Mo Jingshan. After all, the real parties involved were Ji Hongwen and Chairman Xiao. She lowered her eyes and calmed down. But to be honest, when she thought that her mother had nothing to do with that family who were too vulgar and greedy, she felt a gust of foul air in her chest was released and she felt much better. Fortunately, it was not their blood that flowed on her body. Perhaps because she had told him all the things she had kept in her heart, she felt much better now. Jin Wan was about to withdraw her hand from the man's, but Mo Jingshan held her tightly and looked down at the little woman leaning against the seat. You've been alone for 3 years. Are you used to dealing with problems on your own? I'm here. You can lean on my shoulder at any time. You don't have to be alone. Jin Wan pursed her lips and said expressionlessly, who I am now, aren't you the one who shaped me? The man chuckled because she was still holding a grudge and pulled her to his side. Jin Wan ignored him, closed her eyes, leaned against the seat and was about to sleep. She refused to lean against him until the man raised his arm and took her in, pressing her head against his shoulder. Jin Wan still wanted to struggle, but Mo Jingshan pressed her head down. Just lean against me. Don't move. Jin Wan wanted to get up, but she was really sleepy. After thinking for a while, she didn't move anymore. She simply leaned against the man, closed her eyes and said, I'll only lean against you for half an hour. Wake me up in half an hour. The man's low voice was accompanied by a smile. Okay. However, half an hour later, Jin Wan was still sleeping on his shoulder. Of course, Mo Jingshan wouldn't wake her up. When the car passed a speed bump, he raised his hand to support Jin Wan's head and held her in his arms, letting her lie in his arms. Chapter 634. When she returned to High City a few days ago, the people in the company didn't explain the situation. It was not until she came back that she learned that during her absence, High City's Xing Group had been targeting MN Group. First, Ji Mingran's studio made a big move. She launched a land purchase plan with a 50% to 100% ratio. She put up several very good sites for sale and promoted them vigorously. Sheng Yihan directly invested a large sum of money in her and there were advertisements everywhere. This move attracted the attention of most real estate developers, causing several plots of land under MN Group to be left unattended. However, in this case, Jin Wan only needed to make a small concession in the price to attract the attention of her peers. After all, this year's real estate prices in High City were indeed the highest in the past 3 years. This opportunity must not be wasted. However, the Sheng Corporation had taken a risky move, and there were all kinds of people in the same industry who were causing trouble for her. As a result, Ji Mingran Studio's performance soared this month. Now, as long as it was related to Ji Mingran Studio, whether it was a brand or a partner, anyone with a discerning eye could see that if it continued to develop like this, there would be a second real estate studio in High City and it would gradually establish its own company. Although this studio did not have the assistance of someone like Mr. Zand, it was still rooted in High City and had risen in High City. In addition, it had the backing of the Sheng Corporation. If it could obtain a large sum of financing, its performance and competitiveness in High City alone would be close to the current level of the MN Group. Although MN Group now enjoyed a certain reputation and value in the international Chinese community, it was, after all, moved back to China from London, and its roots in High City were not stable. If Ji Mingran deliberately wanted to compete with her through real estate, which was currently a high-income industry, there was really no telling what would happen in the future. Therefore, at this time, Jin Wan stayed in the company and observed the movements of the real estate industry in High City every day. It had been a week since she left the company, nor did she return to the Ji family to deal with those personal affairs. And just a week after Jin Wan returned to High City, the High City media suddenly exposed a piece of news online and in the major print media. The content of the news was all kinds of gossip about MN Group's CEO Jin Wan, and the news title was even more eye-catching. Shock. Jin Wan, ranked first on the Forbes list of Chinese female entrepreneurs, is actually the ex-wife of the owner of Shine Group. This news not only exposed the fact that Jin Wan was once the #1 socialite of Hai Cheng's upper class, but it also exposed almost all of Jin Wan's life. To the outside world, she was the daughter of the Ji family, the eldest daughter of the Ji family, but to the inside world, her biological father was unknown, and she was not related to the Ji family at all. It was just that the Ji family had never disclosed Jin Wan's identity to the public due to their pride. There was also the marriage between the Ji and Mo families several years ago. Back then, Jin Wan had married into the Mo family and became Mo Jingshan's wife. However, 3 years ago she divorced and went abroad for unknown reasons. Although the eye-catching content was about Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan's marriage, the actual content only mentioned this matter briefly, and more about Jin Wan's personal situation. For example, why Mo Jingshan divorced Jin Wan before he went to the United States to take over Shine. For example, when Jin Wan went to England, she left with Mr. Zand, who was famous in the foreign business circle. For example, when Jin Wan established the company in London, she hugged, smiled, held hands, and even kissed everyone she met in various social venues and social circles. In fact, these were very polite behaviors in Western communication, but from the angle of the photos, it seemed that she took the initiative to stick to those people, take the initiative to hug or flirt with them. The exposé was full of sarcasm about Jin Wan's road to success, saying that she had climbed into the beds of countless men in the past few years and had flirted with countless men in social events and at the wine table. That was how she had managed to get all the investments she had, and in every tender and new project negotiation, she had used all kinds of shady methods to seize the initiative with her partners. More importantly, among the more than 20 photos, only 4 or 5 had Jin Wan's face. Most of them were accidentally taken by the media at some social events and banquets, and the angles of the photos were indeed misleading. However, the rest of the photos were mostly of her back and profile, but those back and profile looked very similar to Jin Wan. Combined with those photos with her face, it was more certain that the person in those photos must be Jin Wan. However, in those photos with only her profile and back, the woman in the photos was dressed in revealing clothes, being hugged and kissed by men in those ambiguous places, or sitting on a man's lap, the straps of her long dress slipping down, looking as if she was about to be undressed in public without the slightest sense of shame. Her face couldn't be seen clearly in those photos, but they looked very similar to Jin Wan's profile. Jin Wan, once the #1 socialite in High City, was successfully labeled as the #1 social butterfly, and all her achievements in the past few years were forcibly exaggerated by sex deals. For a time, all the companies that had cooperated with MN Group were in an uproar. Phone calls came one after another, and many wives of male partners suspected that their husbands had an affair with Jin Wan, the social butterfly, and scolded her on the internet. MN Group was also in a mess. On the one hand, the phone of the public relations department was almost blown up, and on the other hand, the company was besieged by the media and curious onlookers. Even on the day of the company's regular meeting, the media rushed in and waited at the door of the meeting room, but Jin Wan herself didn't appear. The company was besieged, and people from all walks of life condemned Jin Wan, and slogans such as asking MN Group to get out of High City and go back to London were posted all over the major print media and the internet. Jin Wan was at home in Yuehu Bay. She returned home from the company as soon as the messy news broke out, but she didn't tell anyone, and many employees in the company didn't know where she was now. Since the news broke out, Jin Wan shut herself at home, isolated from the world, sitting on the balcony, looking at Yuehu Lake downstairs and quietly drinking milk. No one knew why Jin Wan had been particularly quiet these days. After all, it was not in line with her character, but maybe those photos and the news were all true. Maybe she was too ashamed to come out and explain, and she couldn't explain at all? Chapter 635. Many people were surprised that Jin Wan used to be Mo Jingshan's wife. They didn't expect that such a man as a Prince Charming would have such a black mark in his marriage. How could he have been married to Jin Wan? But fortunately they had divorced. Fortunately, Mo Jingshan was still Mo Jingshan and no longer had anything to do with Jin Wan, a socialite who polluted the business circle. Nowadays the online media was becoming more and more developed, and news and scandals were wantonly publicized. In 2 days it had spread all over the country. After all, People were tired of all kinds of news in the entertainment circle, but gossip and scandals among the rich were very fresh, not to mention that it was about the Mo family and the Ji family in High City. Besides, Jin Wan's MN group had entered the public's attention like a dark horse since the beginning of the year. Many people were optimistic about MN group, but of course, there was no lack of secretly envious and malicious people. The higher one stood, the more attention he would receive once he fell into the water. There were many scandals about the upper class and the rich in recent years, but this time Jin Wan suffered a heavy blow. It could be said that overnight she was abused and looked down upon by the whole internet, and all kinds of articles about how bitchy Jin Wan was spread wildly in the major media. At night, in the CEO's office of the High City division of Shine Group, Xiao Lui pushed the door open, threw the newspapers and magazines in his hands on Mo Jingshan's desk, and looked deeply at the man behind the desk who looked indifferent and calm. It's been 2 days since the incident happened. Our Xiao family couldn't reach out to the Ji family, and Ji Hongwen also refused to help Jin Wan. I thought you must have been trying to help her these days, but I didn't expect that you didn't do anything at all. Seeing Xiao Lui's murderous look, Mo Jingshan's face was calm. Take care of yourself first. When it comes to the Ji family, the Xiao family is really not qualified to help. Xiao Lui's face darkened. If you still don't want to show up, the Xiao family won't sit still. My father has been anxiously looking for Jin Wan these days. He can't eat or sleep well, but she turns off her phone and hides all her contact information. If this continues, who knows what will happen. Those photos of Jin Wan's front were obviously taken at a wrong angle, but those side photos were all taken by Ji Mengran. She and Jin Wan share the same mother but have different fathers, but her figure and profile look similar. As long as she deliberately put on makeup, she would look more like Jin Wan. She asked people to take photos in all kinds of brothels and now exposed them. She must have planned this for a long time. Even if we know she has been plotting this for a long time, what can we do with just a few words of explanation except to support Jin Wan? Can the dirty water that splashed on her be washed clean? Mo Jingshan flipped through the documents without raising his head, calmly saying, even she isn't anxious. Why are you anxious? How do you know she's not anxious? Xiao Lui glanced at him coldly. As far as I know, she hasn't contacted anyone in the past 2 days, has she? Mo Jingshan didn't comment. That little woman locked herself in her home in Yuehu Bay, didn't go out at all and didn't see anyone. She just sat on the balcony all day in a daze. After the accident, she didn't ask anyone for help. She even knew that he could help her when she was being scolded. He could help her block a lot of unnecessary scolding and even help her solve the problem. But she would rather turn off her phone and sit at home without seeing anyone than give him a call. If he hadn't arranged a live-in nanny upstairs so that he could see what was going on her balcony at any time, even he wouldn't know what was going on with Jin Wan. However, the fact was that when everyone thought Jin Wan was too ashamed to see anyone, and some even suspected that Jin Wan would secretly find a place to commit suicide out of shame, Jin Wan was sitting on the balcony drinking milk and watching the scenery. Obviously, if she could find a way to solve the problem in time, she wouldn't have dragged it on for so long. Dragging it until now could only mean that she couldn't explain herself because of those photos, and she couldn't come up with a good solution even after locking herself up for 2 days. But even at this point she was still very tough and didn't say a word. Mo Jingshan didn't even need her to beg him at all. Even if she just sent him a WeChat message to let him know that she needed him, all the problems could be solved, but she still kept quiet. Xiao Lui had always been calm, but after 2 days he didn't hear a word from Mo Jingshan, so he came here to see if he was going to chase Jin Wan back. But now he saw Mo Jingshan was calm and indifferent, and from his understanding of men, he could tell what he was waiting for. Ji Mingran seems to have made a big move this time. It seems that she has made a big move. She confronted Jin Wan head-on in the business circle and suppressed Jin Wan with public opinion. She must hate Jin Wan's company, so she's trying to give her a fatal blow. Xiao Lui glanced at the news that popped up on his cell phone from time to time. In the past 2 days, all the major gossip news had been dominated by Jin Wan's name. He casually threw his cell phone onto the coffee table in the office, took out a cigarette, lit it and put it in his mouth, narrowed his eyes and said, "If you don't do something, it's really hard to chase my sister." One of them smoked and the other read documents. Although they were in the same office, they tacitly kept silent. Occasionally, various news about Jin Wan's gossip history popped up on their cell phones at the same time, and the media kept scolding Jin Wan. Even the hot searches about MN Group and Jin Wan on Weibo, which had gradually come into the public's attention in the past 2 years, crushed countless stars in the entertainment circle for 2 days in a row. Xiao Lui didn't sit long and left. Late at night. Mo Jingshin moved his eyes away from the documents in his hand and looked at the computer screen that had been on all the time. The hot news list of the major media was closely following Jin Wan's ranking. It was the news that Ji Mingran's studio had just signed a 300 million yuan land purchase agreement, and more detailed information about Ji Mingran was exposed in the media. It was said that Ji Mingran was the real Missy of the Ji Corporation, that Ji Mingran was qualified to inherit the Ji Corporation, and that Ji Mingran was very business-minded and was comparable to Jin Wan. Mo Jingshin watched as the topic of comparing Jin Wan and Ji Mingran's popularity continued to rise. His brows moved slightly as he smiled coldly. So that's what you're planning. That. Chapter 636. Mo Jingshin picked up the phone, dialed a number and made a simple arrangement. Find the media person who is pushing the topic of Ji Mingran. There's no need to suppress her. Just let her do it. Then the man sat quietly at his desk, watching the news on the computer slowly changing. The next day Shinmu knocked on the door and entered. "CEO Mo, I found the media company and the photographer who worked with Ji Mingran. These are all the original photos in their camera." Mo Jingshin glanced at him, and Shinmu quickly came up and handed him the USB flash drive, saying, "The original photos are in here. The person has been taken away by the police for investigation. I've seen those photos. There are more than 100 of them from all angles. They haven't been deleted or processed. The ones that have been exposed in the media are the ones that look the most like Miss Ji from the back and side of the photos. Take a look. The USB flash drive is very interesting. There are even videos. Aside from some unsteady front photos, Ji Mingran's face can also be seen in those videos." Shinmu knew the reason why Mo Jingshin didn't show up for the past 2 days. It was because Jin Wan's current situation was not good enough to protect her. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to wash away the dirty water on her. What he needed to do was to protect Jin Wan. While protecting her, he had to boil all the dirty water that had been splashed on her before pouring it back on her. Moreover, before there was evidence, it was not a good time for Mo Jingshin to show up for the past 2 days. Seeing that CEO Mo was already looking at the photos, Shinmu didn't speak anymore. He turned to leave the office and picked up his phone to check the news, only to find that all kinds of news about Ji Mingran had suddenly become the hottest topic. Shinmu took a look and smiled. Sure enough, as long as CEO Mo was in control of this matter, it wouldn't be easy for anyone to climb up by stepping on Jin Wan. Jin Wan didn't watch the news tonight. Anyway, it was all about the same things. The incident had been brewing for 2 days. Her initial anger had now become numb. She took out the last dish that she had just cooked and placed it on the dining table. Xia Tian, who was constantly looking at her mobile phone at the table, glanced at the 3 dishes and 1 soup on the table and couldn't help but say, "At this time, you still have the patience to cook. I said that I came to accompany you and see how you are. It's fine if you don't eat at night, but you insisted on cooking and made such a sumptuous meal. If I didn't know better, I would think that you have something to celebrate." Although she said that, Xia Tian's hand still picked up the chopsticks and put a piece of meat into her mouth. She smacked her lips a few times and couldn't help but say, "After you came back, I was pregnant until I gave birth. I didn't have time to accompany you alone. I didn't realize that your cooking skills are so good now. The more you do, the better it will be. Do you cook a lot now? The company is so busy, how can I have time to cook for myself? A few years ago, I could only order takeout from the company. When I was in England during the most difficult year, I almost cooked every day. She used to cook very well, but now the taste of her cooking was definitely better than that of 3 years ago." After taking a bite, Xia Tian couldn't help but pick other dishes. Then she got up, ran to the kitchen to get a bowl and came out to drink the soup. In the end, most of the dishes on the table were eaten by Xia Tian. Jin Wan didn't eat much, but she was full. Xia Tian was so full that she had to get up and walk back and forth in her room. When she walked to the balcony and looked down at the moon lake below, she sighed. "Fortunately, you moved your home to Yuehu Bay early, and there are not many people who know where you live. The security here is better, and those reporters can't break in. I've been worried about you, but it seems that you are in a good mood." And from what Jin Wan said just now, she could tell that cooking was also a way to vent her emotions. But her calmness was still unsettling. After all, the scolding outside was really unbearable. Xia Tian had wanted to contact the media directly and explain for Jin Wan, but she was afraid that she would cause trouble if she acted rashly, so she came to see her first. "Otherwise, will I commit suicide because of depression?" Jin Wan put away the dishes and replied as she walked out of the kitchen. "Not really. It's just some gossip. If you commit suicide because of this scandal, All the female stars in the entertainment circle who are slandered every day will be dead. Xia Tian leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window on her balcony and looked at Jin Wan, who came to clean up the house. You live here by yourself now. Didn't you hire an aunt to help you? I hired an aunt to come and clean the house every 2 days, but I didn't let her come these 2 days. I want to be alone. Xia Tian looked at her. What's there to be alone? Ji Minggran has clearly prepared for this. Just now, I saw the news and found that the topic about her studio suddenly overshadowed your popularity, and the news about which one of you is qualified to inherit the Ji Corporation has also spread. She has been thinking about these things for a long time. Jin Wan went to pour a glass of water, then held the glass and drank the warm water in it, saying, her hatred for me is much more than what you see and know. But this time she did plan it for a long time. The photos I was taken at the social events in London were all illustrations and some business news of the official media. That's all she could collect. She found some photos that looked ambiguous, enlarged them, and then released all kinds of photos that she deliberately took to confuse the public. Then can't you say that you and Ji Minggran's back and profile are similar? Jin Wan chuckled. What's the use of saying it? In this kind of entertainment society, many people will only believe what they want to believe. Even if I explain now and say that the person in those photos is not me, not many people will believe me. Even if I say a bunch of reasons, it will be the same. They will only believe what they see. What's more, the scandals and the rich and powerful can satisfy the mood of many people. If I could wash my name clean with just a few words, would I still need to lock myself up at home for 2 whole days? Xia Tian was silent for a moment and then said, but now you have a chance to defend yourself. The 2 hot topics about Ji Minggran have become the first and second, and the topic about you has become the third, which proves that her purpose is not pure. Chapter 637. Xia Tian looked at her and asked, since Ji Minggran was ready to give you a blow, she must have done it slowly. She suddenly became the first one. Did she make a mistake in her plan because she was too anxious, or did someone push her up? Who else could it be? In this vast Hai Cheng, only Mo Jingshan had the ability to control the media and suddenly push Ji Minggran's popularity up in such a short period of time. In fact, Xia Tian had guessed it, but she deliberately asked Jin Wan. Wan, I think Mo Jingshan actually wants to help you, but you keep turning off your phone and don't contact anyone. Xia Tian looked at her. This matter is also related to your marriage. Most of the curses are from those women who are jealous of you. It's a fact that you were married to him. Now if he comes to help you, you'll get twice the result with half the effort. You've been very stubborn since you came back from England. I know you were really hurt when you left 3 years ago, but if you can still be with Mo Jingshan, you should control your temper. I think he still favors you, and you don't like any other man except him, do you? Jin Wan didn't speak, just holding the cup and looking down at the 2 most popular topics on her phone. Xia Tian came over again, took her cell phone away and didn't let her look at it again. When Jin Wan had nowhere to look and looked back at her, Xia Tian raised her eyebrows and looked at her. I'll cover you in a while. Dress up. Your car is too eye-catching now and you can't take a taxi. Drive my car and go to Mo Jingshan. When did I say I was going to find him? In this situation, what can he do even if he comes to help? Jin Wan's expression was very indifferent. After returning from Ji City, Jin Wan had been busy in the company. She hadn't contacted Mo Jingshan these days, probably because she was busy to keep a distance from him. But after returning from Jing City, Jin Wan's mood had changed. After returning from Ji City, she couldn't tell what was on her mind now. Mo Jingshan didn't know what to say. No matter what the result will be, I believe in Mo Jingshan. Xia Tian persuaded her patiently, you still don't ask him for help at this time. Do you really plan to go out in this way in the future? What's more, it's not just your own reputation that's at stake right now, but also MN Group. You have thousands of employees in your company, and the company's stock has fallen a lot in the past 2 days. If this continues, have you thought about the consequences? Yes, but that doesn't mean there's no other way. Xia Tian rolled her eyes at her in exasperation. You clearly know that no matter what the best method is with Mo Jingshan's help, it will yield twice the result with half the effort, but you just have to avoid this most important person. Jin Wan did not speak. It's your business that you have a personality, but you're not alone now. You're the president of MN Group and the person in charge. You have the responsibility and the need to deal with this matter as soon as possible, instead of dragging it on like this. There's the shortest way, but you insist on taking a detour. Xia Tian said as she grabbed Jin Wan's arm and dragged her all the way back to the bedroom. What for? I'm going to disguise you. At least dress up so that no one will recognize you when you go out. With that, Xia Tian opened Jinwan's wardrobe, took out a black hooded sweater and threw it to her. Then she found a pair of jeans and threw them to her. Finally, she rummaged around and took out a pair of oversized sunglasses for her. Jinwan, it's so dark now and you want me to wear sunglasses? Are you afraid that no one can see that I'm sneaking out? Xia Tian. She suddenly took the sunglasses from Jinwan's hand and turned to take out a stack of medical masks from her bag. I caught a cold half a month ago. I was afraid that I would infect the child, so I went to the pharmacy to buy these masks. They are all new and unused. Put them on later and pretend that you have a cold so that no one will suspect you. Jinwan. In the end, Xia Tian saw that Jinwan was fully dressed and had put on the hood behind the sweater. The hood was big enough to cover the space on both sides of her face. If she walked with her head down in the mask, even if the media had X-ray vision, they might not be able to recognize her. Xia Tian was satisfied and handed her car keys to Jinwan. Jinwan looked at the car keys in her hand and then at her fully dressed appearance, and for some reason she had a feeling that she was being forced to do something. It was already past 11 o'clock in the evening. Jinwan was not sure where Mo Jingshan was, and Xia Tian wouldn't let her stay at home in Yuehu Bay. Having nowhere to go, she could only drive around High City. But as she drove, she finally drove to the square opposite the Shine Group. She turned her eyes to the office area on the top floor and saw that the lights of the CEO's office were on. Jinwan stopped the car. Just as she got out of the car, she happened to see Shinmu coming out of the company. It was so late, but Shinmu was still here. As soon as Shinmu came out, he saw Jinwan. Although Jinwan had covered herself up, there was no one in the square opposite the company in the middle of the night. There were only cars passing by quickly on the road, but Jinwan was standing by the car. If Shinmu hadn't had a strong heart, he would have been startled by her. After staring at Jinwan for a long time, Shinmu walked over. Seeing Jinwan fully dressed and her eyes exposed through the mask, he held back his laughter and asked, "Miss Ji?" Jinwan felt a little embarrassed just now, but being recognized she had to turn around and look at him. "Why are you still in the company so late?" "I was just about to go home, but COMO should stay in the company tonight." "He is still in the office. Are you going to go up to see him?" Shinmu asked. Jinwan was silent for a moment and said, "I'm just passing by." Shinmu nodded solemnly. "Yes, passing by." "Then Miss Ji, who passed by our company at 11 o'clock in the middle of the night, if you are sure you don't want to go in to see COMO, I'm leaving. There are security guards in the company at night. If you go in like this, you will probably be stopped outside and the security guards are likely to send you directly to the police station." "Jinwan, are you sure you don't want to go in to see COMO?" Shinmu asked with a smile. "Jinwan, then I'm leaving," Shinmu said, made a gesture of goodbye to her and turned to leave. Shinmu stopped and looked back at her. Seeing her embarrassed look, he couldn't help but smile. "All right, since you are here, why are you hesitating? I'll take you in." Chapter 638. After sending Jinwan to the top floor of the company, Shinmu left. After all, it was already late and Jinwan didn't want to bother him anymore. But standing outside the elevator on the top floor of Shine Group, in the bright and clean corridor, Jinwan stood for a long time, glancing in the direction of the light in the CEO's office. The next morning, Shinmu arrived at the company before the others arrived. It was just 7 o'clock in the morning. When he arrived at the top floor, he didn't see Jinwan and was about to go to his assistant's office. However, when he passed by the CEO's office, he saw the door was open, and the cleaning staff of the logistics department who got up earlier were cleaning the office. Mo Jingshan had just come out of the break room. It seemed that he was really busy in the company last night and didn't rest much. After taking a shower, he went out of the break room. But there seemed to be no trace of Jinwan. Shinmu felt that something was wrong. If Jinwan came, COMO shouldn't be like this, he thought for a while, knocked on the door and walked in. "COMO," Mo Jingshan took a look at him and walked to the desk. He picked up the documents on the desk and was about to ask him to hand them over to the planning department when the other employees came to work. However, when he looked at him again, he saw Shinmu's hesitant look and asked indifferently, "What's the matter? Did Miss Ji leave last night?" Mo Jingshan paused and looked at him again. "What? Miss Ji came to the company to see you yesterday. I specially sent her to the top floor and then left. Didn't she enter the office?" Mo Jingshan put the documents in his hands on the desk and looked at Shinmu, who was standing in front of the door with a puzzled look. "When? Last night, around 11 o'clock in the middle of the night. When I was about to go home, I saw her standing in the square opposite the company, standing in the car and hesitating, so I directly sent her in. Mo Jingshan glanced out of the office again, did not speak, and walked out. Shinmu quickly backed away from the door. He saw Mo Jingshan walk out of the office, look around on both sides of the corridor, and then walk toward the escalator closest to the office. The moment he pushed open the escalator door, Mo Jingshan's gaze was fixed on the small black figure. Jin Wan did come to the top floor last night, but considering that Mo Jingshan was still in the company and the lights in the office were on, she guessed that he was busy with something, so she didn't go in. She hesitated for a long time and finally didn't knock on his door. After all, this matter was really tricky for her. She had always thought that when dealing with people like Ji Menggran, she would be fine as long as she didn't let her take advantage of her, but she didn't expect that her sister, who had the same mother but different father, would finally take advantage of her back and profile to give her such a blow. Ji Menggran even seemed to have studied Jin Wan's dressing style in the past 3 years. In those photos, Ji Menggran was wearing the same clothes as Jin Wan, or the style was the same, including her hairstyle. In this case, it was Ji Menggran's full blow and Jin Wan's unpreparedness. Perhaps she should have thought that as early as Ji Menggran said a few words about the inheritance of the Ji Corporation, she should have been prepared, and she wouldn't have been taken advantage of like this. Jin Wan didn't know how to talk to Mo Jingshan. After thinking for a long time, she finally went to the corridor closest to his office and sat on the stairs for several hours. Even now, when it was dawn, she still sat there without moving. The corridor was actually very dark and there were automatic sensor lights on it. She sat here all night and didn't move, so the lights were naturally off. But before Jin Wan heard anything, she suddenly saw the light come on. She, who was sitting on the stairs with her arms around her knees, paused slightly and subconsciously turned her eyes, only to see the man in a white shirt and black trousers standing at the top of the stairs. He had one hand in his trouser pocket and his eyes were clear and deep as he looked down at her. She froze. The man stood there, looking at her sitting on the stairs with her arms around her knees, and his indifferent tone was emotionless. "Have you been sitting here all night? How is the air in the corridor?" Jin Wan. She abruptly stood up, but because she had been sitting there for too long, her legs were numb. It was as if a sharp electric current was running through her legs and feet. Instantly, she was in so much pain that she leaned against the wall beside her to barely stand. Mo Jingshan was about to approach her when her body swayed. When he saw her leaning against the wall, he slowed down. He lowered his eyes to look at the black hoodie she was wearing and the large hat on her back. He could guess what she had dressed up to come here last night. There was a smile hidden in the man's eyes. It was not very obvious, at least from Jin Wan's point of view. Mo Jingshan's expression was almost as indifferent as a bird's. "How did you know I was here?" Jin Wan waited until the pain in her legs and feet had subsided before she looked up at the man. Mo Jingshan glanced at her. "I don't have X-ray vision. Of course I couldn't know you had been sitting outside my office all night. Shinmu just came to work and found you were not here, so he asked me." Jin Wan pursed her lips. "I didn't disturb you, did I?" She clearly wanted to come over to ask for his help, but refused to get to the point. She seemed to be afraid that she would disturb him. Mo Jingshan looked at her silently for a moment and said indifferently, "You didn't enter the office. How could you disturb me?" Who was Mo Jingshan? She was afraid that from the moment he knew she was here, he had already known her purpose of coming here. Jin Wan stood against the wall for a while, thinking that since she had seen him, it seemed that there was no need to continue hiding. She slowly clenched her fists against the wall behind her, thought for a while and finally spoke. "In fact, I've been considering whether to ask you to help me these days, but I don't want to implicate you. The insults on the internet have also affected you. I don't know if they have caused you any trouble." Jin Wan stood there and said softly, "Mo Jingshan, it's very difficult for me to get through this, isn't it? The comments on the internet are just moving their fingers. You're such a big-hearted person. Why would you care about what others say? But now I don't have any evidence to prove my innocence. Even if I want to explain, no one will believe me. But if things continue to develop like this, I'm afraid I can't even stay in High City." "Who said you need to explain?" Mo Jingshan chuckled. "Every incident has its own cause. There's no need to panic. Find the cause and the problem will be easily solved." Jin Wan was startled. "What do you mean?" The man reached out to her, his voice gentle and patient. "Come here. Dash." Chapter 639. Seeing the man reach out to her, Jin Wan was silent for a moment, walked up the stairs and hesitated before raising her hand to grab the man's cuff. She said, "Mo Jingshin, I'm here to ask you for help, not to flirt with you." The man gave a faint smile, held her hand in his palm and pulled her into his arms. Jinwan stumbled and couldn't stand steadily because she had been sitting like this all night, so she fell into his arms. When her face bumped against his chest, she heard the man's voice, which seemed to be smiling, whispering in her ear, "Is there a difference?" If it weren't for love, she wouldn't have come to him for help. Jinwan didn't speak. After all, she was here to ask for help and had no reason to be arrogant. However, the man just looked indifferent as if he didn't care about her affairs, but now she strangely felt as if he had been waiting for a long time. The man took her out of the stairwell and didn't let go of her hand. He looked at the time. "You've been sitting in the corridor for so long. Aren't you hungry? Let's go back to the office and have breakfast." Jinwan still didn't speak and was led into the office by the man. The cleaning staff had left, and Shinmu was sure that Mo Jingshin had found Jinwan after staying in the corridor for so long, so he went back to the assistant's office. There was no one else here. The bright, spacious and modern office smelled faintly of fresh fragrance. The cleaning staff must have put some faintly fragrant fungicide on the floor. After Jinwan entered, he asked her to sit down and she went to sit on the sofa. The man took a look at her, called someone to send breakfast over, and then called Shinmu to arrange a press conference at 10 o'clock in the morning. When Jinwan heard the words press conference, she thought it was a press conference for a new project of his company. Anyway, if he had something to do, he could go ahead. It made no difference whether she stayed in Yuehu Bay or here. However, after breakfast, the man went to a meeting and asked her to go to his lounge to sleep for a while. Jinwan was indeed sleepy. After all, she had been sitting in the corridor for so long and hadn't slept all night. It wasn't like she hadn't been to this lounge before. After the man left, she got up and went to the lounge. She didn't know how long he would be busy with the meeting and the press conference. She sat on the edge of the bed and threw her bag and cell phone aside. In the past 3 days, the aggressive news and comments about her on the internet had almost changed her habit of looking at her cell phone before going to bed. She was too lazy to look at it, so she lay down and took a short nap. However, as soon as she closed her eyes, she accidentally fell asleep. An hour and a half later, it was already 9:30 a.m. There was still half an hour before the press conference. Mo Jingshin returned to his office. The person in charge of a department store in High City entered the office with him, holding a set of clothes specially selected for Jinwan and waiting respectfully in the office. When Mo Jingshin woke Jinwan up, she was still in a daze. After all, she had only slept for an hour. In a daze, she heard the man say, "Go wash up, change and come to the press conference with me." She sobered up a little. Looking at the gentle and patient face of the man who bent over the bed to wake her up, it took her a long time to come back to herself. "What press conference? Do you want me to go with you?" Seeing that the little woman was still a little sluggish after being woken up, Mo Jingshin sighed and kissed her on the lips with a smile. With this kiss, Jinwan woke up completely. She jumped up from the bed and quickly went to wash up. When she went out, she saw the clothes sent by the mall staff. It was a very fitting French brand suit. In short, it looked more suitable for facing the media than the black sweater and jeans Jinwan was wearing. Jinwan didn't ask much, but she could guess that Mo Jingshin must have made arrangements for her. She didn't think much and cooperated with him to change. At 10 o'clock, Jinwan followed him to the so-called press conference, which was a very large multimedia hall on the 5th floor of Shine Group, where other project and product press conferences were held. When she walked in backstage, she saw that the guest seats outside had been filled up so quickly, and judging from the cameras and logos on the microphones in their hands, she was sure that all the major domestic media had arrived. Even the more senior and authoritative major media that never gossiped were present. There were many people here, but after all, this was Shine Group, so no one dared to speak loudly and waited patiently for the press conference to begin. Jinwan's incident had attracted so many media outlets in such a short time. It could be seen that Jinwan's incident was breaking news for many media outlets, but the other authoritative domestic media outlets had also arrived in such a short time, which was obviously because of Mo Jingshin's presence. Jinwan stood backstage and looked at the media. She found that she had been hiding from these people in Yuehu Bay for 2 days, but now standing here and seeing so many people, she didn't panic at all. What? She turned to look at the man in a black suit beside her. "Although I admit that if you show up, you can help me regain some face, aren't you afraid of being cursed with me by holding a press conference to support me?" The man's indifferent gaze fell on her face. "Are you afraid?" "Of course not." The man chuckled. "Since you came to me, you should put all your trust in me." Of course, Jinwan trusted him, but this kind of thing was related to their former marriage. She just didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but she didn't expect that Mo Jingshan, who had always been low-key, would choose to hold such a grand press conference. Just as she was about to go on stage, Jinwan suddenly saw some people behind the media who had snuck in through their connections. For example, Ji Minggran was also in the crowd. She had followed a media friend in. Of course, Shine Group was not a place that could be easily snuck in, unless someone deliberately turned a blind eye to it and let her in. Seeing that Ji Minggran had actually snuck in, Jinwan narrowed her eyes. Only then did she realize that perhaps Mo Jingshan did not just want to explain and support her. Otherwise, why would he allow Ji Minggran to sneak into the scene? Chapter 640. Jinwan was wearing a black business-style suit inside and a knee-length cream-white coat outside. Her hair, which was much longer than before, was tucked into a hair tie of the same color, and she was wearing a pair of high-heeled boots. Just like her usual image in the company and in front of the media, she was exquisite, bright, and had an extraordinary temperament. It was as if she had not been defeated by the scandals of the past few days. Instead, the light in the bottom of her eyes was clear. When she walked out from the back and faced the media, she was also calm and fearless. But Mo Jingshan didn't let her speak, so she just walked out and sat down on the stage with a calm smile on her face. CEO Mo, you rarely attend press conferences in person. Many of your company's important new projects press conferences are usually attended by the vice president or other people in charge of the company. It can be said that you rarely appear in public like this in front of the media. Is it because of the reputation of your ex-wife, Miss G, or for other reasons that you suddenly hold a press conference in person this time? CEO Mo, are you going to say something on behalf of Miss G? Both of you appear at the same time. Can it prove that CEO G of MN Group was indeed married to you? The news of the marriage between the G and Mo families in High City many years ago has been dug out, but we haven't seen your photo. I wonder if CEO Mo has anything to say. I wonder what President Mo's opinion is on Miss G's frequent flirting with her business partners in recent years, and her conduct is improper. She has even been involved in a sex trade. Mo, is it because Miss G is really desperate that she has to ask you to explain for her? As soon as Mo Jingshan appeared, the reporters had begun to ask questions. However, the man just coldly looked at the media at the press conference and listened to their questions. These reporters had restrained themselves. At least, although their questions were tricky, they were not as tricky as they were in other places. At least, they were still afraid of Shine Group and Mo Jingshan, but they still had to ask some key questions in such a big news. After some related questions were asked, Mo Jingshan took the microphone from the reporters. There are only two parts of today's press conference. The first part is to look at the photos and say something. Why don't you sit quietly and wait? After looking at the photos and videos, we'll start the interview. Hearing this, the reporters quickly returned to their seats. When the audience fell silent, Jinwan suddenly felt there was a light behind her. Only then did she notice that the black screen behind her had a projector function, and it was a very high-definition 300-inch screen. She looked back and saw the black screen lit up. The first photo that appeared was the ambiguous and unsightly photo of Jinwan, sitting on a partner's lap and feeding him a drink, mouth to mouth, that had been widely spread in the media. As soon as this photo was released, there were some boos in the hall, but Jinwan was sitting at the bottom of the screen and looking at the photo. Although she didn't know what Mo Jingshan had prepared, she could at least regard herself as a bystander and didn't feel too nervous or ashamed. After all, the person in the photo was not her at all. However, the photos were played in the form of a slide. After the first photo stayed in the audience's eyes for about 5 seconds, it was changed to another photo. This photo was the same scene and the same person as the first one, but the angle was different. Obviously, the other photos were taken continuously due to the movements of the characters. In this photo, Jinwan was no longer a back view, but a side face, which still looked very similar to Jinwan. In the third photo, the angle was changed again because Jinwan had unintentionally turned her face and seemed to be smiling, but this time at least 1/3 of her face could be seen. The latter two photos were not in the photos exposed by the media. The reporters present didn't understand the significance of these photos, but then it was time for them to slap their faces. Hundreds of photos from all angles, back, profile, front, high definition, and some blurry because they were taken in a hurry, were projected one by one. Many of the photos that could be seen from the front surprised the reporters because from the front, Jinwan was not the same person at all, but her profile and back were very similar. Even Jin Wan didn't expect that Mo Jingshan could find out who took these photos and find the source of the original photos. At first, she thought these were Ji Mingran's photos, but at this moment she realized that Ji Mingran must have hired some familiar reporters and paid them to secretly take photos from a distance. Only in this way could Jin Wan be found out by accident. It turned out that this was the source of what Mo Jingshan said. Jin Wan didn't speak but continued to look at Ji Mingran's face on the big screen that gradually became clear. At the same time she turned her eyes to look at Ji Mingran, who was hiding behind the crowd and whose face was getting paler and paler under her sunglasses. Almost more than 100 photos, all of which were not released in front of the media and were exposed by the media, were included. Those who knew about photography could naturally see what was going on in these photos. These were the original photos without any image processing. These photos were broadcast live on TV, which was enough to prove that Jin Wan was really wronged. The woman whose back and profile were very similar to Jin Wan was not her at all. If one didn't look at them with a dirty and ambiguous gaze, those photos with Jin Wan's face were just normal social behaviors in British social circles, and there was nothing out of line. And they didn't expect that after the photos, there would be several videos. In the videos, the woman deliberately stuck close to the bodies and legs of the partners, in various places, and from time to time rubbed her buttocks against the partners' lower bodies. At the same time, the woman in the video turned her head to ask the cameraman, "Are you done? It must be the effect I want or it'll be a waste of effort." For a moment the audience was in an uproar. Although not many people knew Ji Mingran's name, she was the second daughter of the Ji family, and there would always be some reporters who knew her and those who had interviewed her studio. Chapter 641. No wonder Ji Mingran's studio signed a new project and inherited the Ji Corporation were the hot topics yesterday afternoon and evening. It turns out that she deliberately framed Jin Wan. It turns out that her sister came out to frame her. What a treacherous person. The video on the giant screen continued to play. Ji Mingran's smiling face suddenly froze on the screen. At the same time, the reporters on the stage kept taking pictures of the man and woman sitting calmly on the stage. The traffic of the various news media, which was already about to explode, suddenly surged in. In this half an hour, the popularity of the video suddenly skyrocketed and didn't go down. These are all photos. Even the date, time, and file size of the photos are displayed next to the photos. You can tell at a glance that they are the originals. The photos that were exposed a few days ago have obviously been manipulated. Otherwise, even if Ji Mingran deliberately imitated Jin Wan's clothes and makeup, it can't be so similar. Those photos are fake and these are the real ones. The faces of the reporters were all filled with anger. They had originally come to join in the fun of this ugly show of a wealthy family and wanted to find some explosive news to take credit for. However, the media had human nature after all. Faced with such a truth, all of them looked extremely resentful. However, when the audience had known the truth and the audience was full of curses against Ji Mingran, Mo Jingshan remained calm and sat there without a ripple. After seeing those photos, Jin Wan also calmly smiled. Was this enough to prove that before she came to him, Mo Jingshan had long been looking for the person who took the photos? Ji Mingran had hidden so well that it was not easy to find her, but he found these photos in 2 days and quickly held a press conference for her. With Mo Jingshan's influence and Jin Wan's current popularity, now these photos were the truth. They didn't need to say a word. People who were not stupid would know the whole story. Also, yesterday the various topics about Ji Mingran became the first and second place, attracting a lot of people's attention. Now, with these photos and Ji Mingran's topic, many things were self-evident. Mo Jingshan and Jin Wan remained calm in front of the media, but behind the crowd, when Ji Mingran heard their curses, her expression changed from rigid to one of fear. She slowly stepped back, trying to leave this place. However, just as Ji Mingran was about to run out, 2 security guards who had been waiting outside the door for a long time blocked her way. They looked at her coldly, not giving her a chance to leave. "You." Ji Mingran glared at them angrily. The entire press conference had progressed to the point Mo Jingshan expected, and the man coldly said, "I wonder if everyone is satisfied with the first segment of looking at pictures and talking?" The media couldn't help but sigh. "I didn't expect to make such a big mistake. I've really wronged COG. But after the truth is revealed, what is CEO Mo's so-called second step?" Mo Jingshan coldly curved his lips. His gaze passed through the crowd and landed on Ji Mingran, who was blocked by the door of the multimedia hall by the security guards. For the second segment, the person in question, the second Miss Ji, should naturally be the one to explain to everyone. This self-directed show, Where exactly did she learn this idea from, and what is her motive? As soon as Mo Jingshan finished speaking, all the media present looked back at the door. When they saw the woman who was dressed in low-key clothes, they immediately understood what was going on, got up and rushed over with the cameras. Ji Minggran didn't expect that today. She just came here to see Jin Wan make a fool of herself. After all, Jin Wan couldn't explain the whole thing even if Mo Jingshan showed up, but she didn't expect that the original photos would be found, nor did she expect that Mo Jingshan had set up this trap and waited for her to jump into it. The media immediately rushed over. She didn't need the security guards to stop them. In an instant, she was surrounded and had no way out. What are you doing? Ji Minggran pressed the oversized sunglasses on her glasses hard and lowered her head to cover her face, refusing to be photographed by the cameras. However, the photos on the screen were all of her face, and it made no difference whether she covered her face or not. Ji Minggran, how could you come here? Do you really think you can completely ruin your sister's reputation? Fortunately, we saw so many original photos from different angles today. Otherwise, I'm afraid all the media and people on the internet would have been fooled by you. I can't believe sisters would use such cruel and shameless means to frame each other. Since you're here, why don't you tell me what you think? Just as the media surrounded Ji Minggran, Mo Jingshan glanced at them indifferently and then his eyes fell on Ji Minggran. Second Miss Ji. His voice was low, as if entwined with an indescribable sarcastic smile. The influence of today's press conference is not small. So many authoritative media are here. It's more direct than finding someone to casually post more than 20 photos on the internet. Since you are here, why don't you finish the second part of the press conference? The man's smile seemed to be quenched with ice, drilling into people's bones and blood, making them feel cold. Ji Minggran covered the sunglasses on her face, her fingertips trembling. She tried to hold back her emotions, turned to look at the stage, gritted her teeth and suddenly took off her sunglasses. Facing the media and the two people on the stage, she said angrily, "Even if I did it, so what? Jin Wan is not my father's biological daughter. What right does she have to inherit the G Corporation's property? Even I, the biological daughter of the G family, am excluded because of her? My father told me clearly that I won't get a penny from the G family. What? She is an illegitimate daughter who doesn't even know who her father is. What?" However, in the face of Ji Minggran's angry accusation, the media kept their cameras on her. Standing 100 meters away, Mo Jingshan looked at the woman who was panic-stricken but forced herself to calm down and said lightly, "Second Miss Ji, if I were you, I would directly admit to the media how my actions over the years have disappointed and dissatisfied your biological father. He would rather hand over the family business to his adopted daughter who is worth tens of billions than hand it over to you, his biological daughter, to be ruined." Ji Minggran's face turned paler and paler, and her pupils kept contracting, but the man smiled coldly. "At least, even if you really ruin Jin Wan's reputation in such a disgraceful way, the one who knows you and your sister best is still Chairman Ji, and the G Corporation's inheritance will still not be handed over to you. After all, your father knows you best. How bad are you to be abandoned by your biological father like this?" Chapter 642. Jin Wan didn't speak. Since Ji Minggran was exposed and the media surrounded her, she seemed to have nothing to do with this show. Seeing the cameras kept pointing at her, Ji Minggran angrily raised her hand to push them away, but the reporter standing closest to her said coldly, "Miss Ji, these cameras are not cheap. If you break them, are you going to compensate us with brand new ones?" As the reporters spoke, they deliberately brought the microphone to Ji Minggran's mouth. "Don't glare at us like this. Since you framed your sister through the media, isn't it natural that you're surrounded by the media now?" The reporters were very good at pestering people. Now that the truth had been revealed, they wanted to take revenge on Ji Minggran. Jin Wan didn't speak, just looked in that direction, and her face was covered with a layer of cold sarcasm. The next second, Ji Minggran forcefully pushed away the microphones in front of her. She grabbed another microphone with an ugly expression and was about to smash the cameras. "It doesn't matter if it's broken. I can't even afford to pay for these cameras." However, rather than smashing the cameras, she wanted to destroy today's evidence. Just as Ji Minggran was about to smash the cameras, Jin Wan stood in front of her and said calmly, "If necessary, I can help you record again." Hearing Jin Wan's words, Ji Minggran froze. The originals of those photos were in Mo Jingshan's hands. Even if the cameras were smashed today, they could record again at any time. Ji Minggran's eyes were red with anger. She turned to see that Jin Wan was still sitting on the sofa on the stage, holding her chin with one hand and looking in this direction with a very indifferent look. Since Miss G is very dissatisfied with today's press conference, why don't you record again? I'll give you one last chance to clarify yourself. Those photos that have been manipulated to confuse people, and your real purpose, why don't you say it yourself? Everyone could feel the bone-chilling coldness behind Mo Jingshan's indifferent tone. The situation in front of the multimedia hall was getting out of control. Because of Mo Jingshan's words, those people pressed closer to Ji Minggran, asking her to say her purpose and intention. What purpose could she have? Driven by Mo Jingshan, many things had become obvious reasons. At this moment, all the people who had watched the live broadcast of the press conference were cursing Ji Minggran on the internet. And Ji Minggran's face was the palest and most panicked expression Jinwan had ever seen. It seemed that she had been extremely panicked and forced by these people. She wanted to get angry but dared not, and her shoulders were trembling uncontrollably. She clenched her hand hard, and the calmness on her face could hardly be maintained. A person who should not be surnamed G is about to take away our G's property. I am not reconciled, so I try to do something to fight for my own interests. Now that things have come to this, I have nothing to say. Ji Minggran didn't care about anything else. She lowered her head and was about to rush out of the crowd when she finally managed to push a few people away. Just as she was about to run out of the multimedia hall, she suddenly saw Ji Hongwen standing outside the door, just behind the crowd. The moment Ji Minggran rushed out, she froze in her tracks. She was surprised to see Ji Hongwen here. Ji Minggran couldn't care less. She lowered her head and was about to rush out of the crowd. However, when she was about to run out of the multimedia hall, she suddenly saw Ji Hongwen standing outside the door. The moment Ji Minggran rushed out, she froze and looked at Ji Hongwen, who was here. Minggran, you complained publicly in front of the media that you couldn't get a penny from the G Corporation. You're really my good daughter. Ji Hongwen's face darkened and he said coldly and angrily, I don't intend to give the G Corporation to you. Don't you know the reason? Jinwan has her own MN group. Even if I give her everything in the G family, it will still belong to the G family. She will protect everything that belongs to the G family. And you? Once I give the G Corporation to you with your stupid brain, I'm afraid it will be swallowed up by the Shen Corporation overnight. Ji Minggran's eyes were red. She had lost face after exposing the truth in front of the media, but she didn't expect that Mo Jingshan could so quickly and ruthlessly invite Ji Hongwen here. Was he going to help Jinwan turn the situation around and kick her into hell? Is this Director G? Sure enough, it's Director G. Director G, since you're here, why don't you tell us what's going on between your two daughters? Some of the media had approached Ji Hongwen, but Ji Hongwen wouldn't speak for her at all. He had always been on Jinwan's side, the one who was not his biological daughter. Ji Minggran's expression stiffened and her pupils dilated as she stared in Ji Hongwen's direction. Then the light in her eyes started to crack bit by bit. Even though her facial expression didn't change, it was clear that she was on the verge of breaking down. Because Ji Hongwen was here, Jinwan got up and walked toward the door. After all, Ji Minggran was surrounded by the media, but Ji Hongwen was the chairman of the G Corporation. People at his age rarely dealt with the media, so she'd better get him out of here as soon as possible. Jinwan walked into the crowd, came to Ji Hongwen's side and raised her hand. Everyone, I'm sorry. Most of today's press conference is about the analysis and explanation of the photos that are close to slander. As for the irrelevant topics, they are mostly family affairs. Please mind your manners. Seeing Jinwan raise her hand to shield Ji Hongwen, Ji Minggran coldly glared at Jinwan with reddened eyes. In order to prevent Jinwan from being squeezed by the crowd, Ji Minggran instinctively raised his hand to shield Jinwan. Seeing this affectionate scene between father and daughter, Ji Minggran suddenly sneered. She abruptly grabbed a camera on the shoulder of a person behind her and viciously smashed it in Jinwan's direction. Watch out. No one expected that Ji Minggran would suddenly take such an extreme action. The camera was not small and was very heavy, and a few screams broke out from the crowd. Just as Jinwan turned around and saw the camera smashing toward her, before she could dodge, Mo Jingshan, who had walked over, grabbed her and quickly pulled her into his arms. At the same time, he turned his back to block the camera for her. Fortunately, Mo Jingshan had pulled her away from the camera. Even though he took the blow for her, the force of the falling camera was much less than before. It only brushed against his shoulder and then fell heavily to the ground. God, it was too dangerous. Are you all right? Mo, are you all right? Chapter 643. Jin Wan was startled by the sound of the camera hitting Mo Jingshan's shoulder. She raised her eyes with a jerk and looked at the man who suddenly came to protect her in his arms. Although the angle of the camera was crooked and not too heavy, she instinctively raised her hand and put it on the man's shoulder. At the same time she asked in a low voice that no one could hear, "Mo Jingshan, are you crazy? If she didn't miss, your shoulder would have been broken by that camera." However, the man held her in his arms and lowered his eyes to look at the fear in her eyes. He curled his lips and ignored the reporters and onlookers present. He only chuckled and said, "If I was really injured, there would be a reason for you, little ingrate, to stay and take care of me." Jin Wan? She didn't continue to speak. In the blink of an eye, Ji Minggran was held down by the security guards to prevent her from doing anything drastic. "Second Miss Ji, are you angry out of humiliation?" Mo Jingshan held onto Jin Wan's waist and did not let go. He turned to look at Ji Minggran, who was restrained by the security guards and had red eyes. Even though Mo Jingshan appeared to be smiling, anyone could sense the coldness and displeasure in him because she had almost hurt Jin Wan with her attack earlier. Ji Minggran's emotions had long slipped to the brink of collapse. "Mo Jingshan, both of you are divorced. There was no relationship at all. You're actually helping her. You actually..." Mo Jingshan coldly smiled and held Jin Wan tighter in his arms. When Jin Wan didn't understand what he was going to do, the man said calmly and slowly, "Since so many reporters are here, I'd better clarify something for Jin Wan." Hearing Mo Jingshan's words, several reporters who were closest to him put their microphones close to him. The man said flatly, "Whether it was 3 years ago or 3 years later, Jin Wan is always my wife. The news about our divorce is just a rumor. We have never divorced." Jin Wan instantly stiffened in his arms, and the reporters around them were even more surprised. But the divorce news that has spread like wildfire doesn't look fake. Everyone is so curious about this Mo's family matters? Mo Jingshan's mild and ordinary voice rang above Jin Wan's head. "Is my verbal proof not enough to convince people of Mrs. Mo's identity? Do you want me to take out the marriage certificate and make it public?" "I don't think so. I never thought Miss Ji would actually be Mrs. Mo." "Jin Wan?" Ji Minggran was in disbelief. That's impossible. The two of you are clearly divorced. When Jin Wan went to London 3 years ago, you were already divorced." Mo Jingshan's response to her was one emotionless sentence. "Whether to leave or not, as the person involved, isn't it clearer?" After finishing his words, Mo Jingshan's movements did not falter. He held Jin Wan's hand and walked past the crowd, leaving the multimedia hall. Right now, the media's focus was on Ji Minggran. Furthermore, the misunderstanding had been cleared. Mo Jingshan, who was usually too lazy to deal with the media, was able to deal with the media today. Naturally, no one dared to chase after him. The corridor of Shine Group was very spacious and clean. It was a completely modern building with special office facilities on each floor. The man opened the elevator door and let her in. It was quiet in the elevator for a long while. Jin Wan turned to look at herself in the mirror and the man who had been quiet and indifferent. She then looked at the changing numbers in the elevator and seemed to be lost in thought. The man's low voice broke the almost stiff silence. "What's wrong? Before you go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to find out your marital status, you suddenly find out that you are still Mrs. Mo. Are you feeling very complicated?" Jin Wan came back to herself and whispered, "Did you just say that in front of the media, or are you really not divorced?" He said flatly, "I thought you already had a conclusion in your heart." She said with some amusement, "Mo Jingshan, it was you who forced me to divorce. I even signed the divorce papers, but you tell me you're not divorced?" Mo Jingshan was a man who would never beat around the bush and delay a problem as long as he could solve it directly. However, when it came to the divorce, he tried every possible way to force her to leave. She thought that in the past 3 years she had nothing to do with him. Previously, she had been hoping that maybe the divorce was under his control. Since he had decided to divorce, he would definitely divorce her. But now she heard him say that he had never divorced her. How on earth did he do it? How could he be so calm when everything was clearly in his heart, in his eyes, and in his control so that no one could see anything? She wanted to ask and had a lot to say, but she suddenly didn't know where to start. She thought for a while and picked the simplest question. "After I signed the divorce papers, I sent them to you. Didn't you sign them?" The man said flatly in a low voice, "As you said, I was the one who proposed the divorce. Although I didn't want to force you to leave in that way, after all, I had to follow the trajectory of my life. Some things should always stand at the original position in order to continue the continuation of various events." "So did you sign them or not?" He replied methodically, Before I returned to the United States to take over Shine, I took some time to bring the divorce papers to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Before the final signing, I was told that the divorce could not be divorced unless both parties were present. Although I did have a way to invite the most powerful lawyer in the country to come and find a reasonable reason to divorce the marriage, according to my understanding of you, when we divorced, you didn't have the ability to make the divorce papers take effect. Jin Wan? You mean the divorce papers? Jin Wan didn't react for a moment and was stunned. When you left High City and went directly to the United States, I gave the signed divorce papers to a friend in the Civil Affairs Bureau and asked him to help me with the divorce. But then something happened to this friend's family, and I haven't been able to contact him. I didn't have time to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau and didn't ask carefully. The man's bony fingers casually adjusted the exquisite and expensive buttons on his shirt cuffs, and he turned his head to glance at her indifferently. So, whether in the past or now, our divorce procedures have stopped at the signing of the divorce papers, and we haven't gone to the final procedure of stamping the seal. Jin Wan inexplicably read a bit of a good mood from his indifferent tone, as if this realization that he suddenly realized 3 years ago when he was at the last step had become the biggest reason for him to be particularly shameless in front of her now. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.